All right, I got 7 o'clock. I'm going to call the meeting to order. First business I would like to discuss is some ground rules. I see we have a lot of visitors on tonight, so please silence your cell phones. Try to eliminate any background noise, and keep yourself muted unless you are speaking. There'll be a time for questions and comments for each project after the Planning Commission reviews. Please use the hand raising icon at the bottom of the screen there, or email Greg. If you are going to speak, please state your name and address for the record. And your comment time is going to be 2.5 minutes. There'll also be a time for public comment at the end of the meeting. So that is it for the ground rules. Let me get a roll call. Planning Commission members. Alex, are you with us?
Yes, I am.
Tim?
Here.
Andy?
Here.
John?
Here.
And our alternate, Tony? Here.
Present.
All right, thank you. Who do we have here with Veris?
Ryan Hahn and Bob McCormick. And then we're joined with Greg Davis of Saul Ewing, Matt Chartrand, Adam Citrullo with Bowler, and David Babbitt with David Babbitt and Associates.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else want to identify themselves for the record?
For me, yes, David Collingwood.
Okay, thank you, David. All right, let's move forward. First item on the agenda is approval of the minutes from our August 9th meeting. We have any corrections, deletions? If not, can I get a motion to approve?
This is Alex. I have none.
Andy, second. I'm sorry, Alex, did you make a motion?
I did not.
Okay. This is Andy. I have none as well.
This is Tim. I have none.
This is John. I have none. I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
This is Alex. I'll second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed, motion carries. All right, so next agenda item was Triple Net Investments. They asked to be pulled off the agenda, so we are going to go right to Veris. I'll hand it over to you guys. You can put this together and we'll see what you have to say.
Yes, this is Ryan Hahn with Veris Partners, and I'll speak to this. And I always feel like these are a little bit weird. I'm no Chris Durstein, but just so it's clear, the camera is right here. You're right there. What I'm looking at is right here. I just don't want to think that I'm not looking you in the eye when I'm presenting here. But getting that out of the way, hopefully you can see my screen. But if I'm looking out into space, it's not because I'm ignoring you. I think you're familiar with the project by now, but just the subject property that we're here for tonight is 2925 Clymer. This is the former drum construction site at the southwest corner of Clymer and Meeting House Road. We've been in front of the Plan Commission now a couple times, and you haven't actually seen us since May. We had quite a bit of work to do following that last Plan Commission meeting. We've gone through, I believe it's 7 iterations of technical review at this point, and at staff's request, we haven't submitted an updated plan set after that, but what we did provide the Plan Commission was a list of, well, a significantly reduced list of saldo waiver requests, and then also a list of additional commitments responding to comments received in previous presentations here. So I don't necessarily have a technical review letter to go through here. So if it is okay with everybody, I wanted to go through, I guess, first of all, just to highlight some of the items in the letter and just provide a better explanation of that. And then I'm going to turn it over to Matt Chartrand just to go through the technical aspects of the waiver. So unless anybody's opposed to that, I'll just walk through these.
You're talking about the revised waiver request letter?
Before I get to that, it is the revised waiver request letter, but there are several commitment items and updates to the plans that I've got at the tail end of that.
Okay.
So if you don't mind, I was just going to go through those first before we get to the technical aspects.
Okay.
So, and I'm sure it'll continue to be a hot topic of discussion, but just following our last reviews and discussion here, we've got residential uses to the east of us and to the north of us. And how do we enhance that buffering further? So I want to highlight two additional items here and how the outward appearance of this is relative to the township. So first and foremost, we're around this perimeter of the parking area on the east side of the site. The SALDA requirement is to have a 4-foot tall berm with a 5-foot board-on-board wood fence. We previously showed and continue to show an 8-foot high fence around the perimeter. And I'll just illustrate that's not just around the parking, that's around this full perimeter. What was absent on that before and what's difficult to ascertain from these two-dimensional plans is the way the grades work here and how this site crowns in the middle and then falls off as you go towards Clymer and goes toward the south. So as a result of that, we were previously showing this berm, or the 4-foot high berm, extending a partial length along the residential homes here to the east. The plan update that we've made since then is we've actually added some smaller parking lot facing retaining walls, which allowed us to extend the length of that berm the entire length of the parking lot. So I want to be clear that is on our revised plans, that will be on our revised submittal, and that's a commitment from us. In addition to that, we previously showed a board-on-board wood fence. I did provide some further detail in this package, but we're changing that fence type from just a standard wood fence to a acoustic barrier style fence. And so we've presented several options there, and we're open to selections on these. And this offers a few benefits. First and foremost, all of these materials, some of these designs are actually like a polyethylene or a molded product. One of these is actually a lightweight concrete product, but they're intended to be low or no maintenance whatsoever relative to a wood fence. So it's enhancing the outer look, the ability to maintain those. And then most importantly is just these are a higher density than a standard wood fence. So that also is intended to mitigate sound propagation across that barrier. So in addition to the berm, that's an 8-foot high fence going around that perimeter. We also have an additional fence line that goes here towards the north and towards the residential uses that's at the top of the retaining wall that goes on this side of the property. In addition to that commitment around the parking area, this fence will also be an 8-foot high sound barrier along that side of the property and have an opportunity to select a variety of finishes on that side. And, we really don't have a horse in that. We're open to input on those selections. I guess moving over there from that barrier, I believe I submitted this before, and if I haven't, there was some question as to how that retaining wall would look, specifically on the Clymer side where you can see it facing to the site. We did suggest that would be a segmental block system. So we did provide some more samples of how that product would look and color selections for that sample as well as to how that outward appearance would look. I did want to throw out here in the meeting, especially as we get towards those walls, one additional option, that we're open to if this is elected. But this is what I've got up on a screen is what's called a ReadyRock system. So in addition to the segmental block walls, this is a much larger module. This actually has what I consider a much better appearance once you get to 3 or 4 courses high, like shown, because these are actually the faces of 4 foot by 8 foot. So it looks much more like a cut limestone, locally sourced. So that's an option if that's of interest. But we'd be willing to put in a ReadyRock wall along those higher elevations facing Clymer. I'll come back to those items in a second for your question, but we made some other challenges just as it relates to the perimeter of this property that I wanted to go through. So the lighting plan, and I'm going to come back to these slides. the lighting plan on this property. So we've gone through several iterations, and where we started at the beginning of the year is what we felt was a compliant lighting plan. All of these light fixtures had a horizontal type cutoff lens, and that's designed to prevent propagation of lighting across the property line. Subsequent to that, and in response to technical comments, we've added light shields to all perimeter lighting fixtures on these property lines, which not only helps stop any lighting propagation, but the glare from those fixtures is reduced. Following our last presentation, I went back to our lighting designer. This is actually something that I learned was available out here, but how can we reduce this impact even further? And one of the things, and this is in that commitment as well, we've added in here what's called an Nlight. It's by Acuity, a lighting control system. And what this does is that this is on, I've highlighted all the yellow fixtures that this would be applied to. But what this does is this makes the normal operation of these lights at 25% of their full level. Then they are actually triggered by motion, because our biggest concern about having the lighting was for security. These are triggered, whether it be vehicular or pedestrian motion, to their normal lighting level. So the normal operation, in addition to the cutoff lenses, in addition to the light shields, is to have these dim to 25% of their operation. And this is more than just an occupancy sensor on a lighting fixture. What this allows is that all of these lighting fixtures have the ability to be controlled instantly. So let's say 6 months after project completion, you have a lighting fixture in this corner that's creating a glare issue for somebody off-site. That's not us getting an electrician out there. We can actually turn the hours of operation off. We can dim that immediately. We can put that on the other operation. So I'm not expecting a gold star on that, but we felt that was a unique and positive improvement. And I just wanted to highlight how that system works. And this is a relatively minor item. Well, it's not a minor item, but a comment that was made previously. We had a lot of discussion. This site has 2 spray irrigation pumps. Matt and Adam did a great job walking through this previously as to how that operates during winter operation. There's 1 pump on the north side of the site, 1 pump on the south side, but a lot of concern on what happens if that pump's impaired, how that gets back into operation. So we've always had an alarm on that pump. We've always had property inspections on that to put that back into operation. We also challenged that designer. How do we make this so that it's that we're instantly notified on that? And the answer was that we've added alarm contacts onto these. The building already is going to be equipped by code requirement with a fire alarm system with an auto dialer with redundancy that's monitored 24 hours a day, 365 days a week. What this allows us to do is actually tie those in as trouble alarms to that alarm system. That's monitored full time, and we have a full-time call list, myself being on it. So if that pump should have some sort of impairment, even on a Thanksgiving day, let's say, I guess I'm going to get called, or our property manager can get called to get somebody out there to repair it immediately. And then, and I apologize, I'm throwing a lot at you here quickly, but there's a lot of discussion, and I know this is really tough to visualize just how these grades and everything integrate together. So I can send these following the meeting as well, but we did do some 3-dimensional modeling, and I think this does a really good job to illustrate how these dimensions work together, how the landscaping works together, a better idea of how this is going to look as a finished product. So just full disclosure on kind of how this is developed. This is actually modeled off the CAD site plan, the CAD version of our building plan, and the CAD version of our landscaping plan. So this is dimensionally accurate, what you're seeing. You will see on some of these slides that we've got some lower opacity landscaping. Just for full disclosure there, that landscaping is off-site. So we don't have a survey on that. Those are assumed sizes based on aerial Google Earth imagery. But just wanted to clarify that that's an assumed area. So we've separated that with a lower opacity. The landscaping is modeled as year 5 growth. If somebody wants to see year 1 or another option, we can certainly ask them to do that. But I'll cycle through these. This is just to give you an idea on that front auto parking lot that we were talking about. This is from our south driveway facing to the north. You can see just what I was talking about in terms of the grade elevation. This actually doesn't illustrate the berm coming across there. The fencing is on the other side of the landscaping. And then I moved to the opposite side of that parking lot. This is facing south across that elevation. You can see it start to drop as you get towards Clymer, and you can start to see that fencing or that sound barrier coming across. We also have one, this is 75 to 100 feet elevation in the air, and this is facing the northeast corner of the building. So this is roughly hovering over Clymer. And this gives an idea of that retaining wall and then that acoustic barrier on top of that retaining wall. This is from the elevated view. We also created one, this is from the same location, but facing towards the southeast. So you can get an idea of how this is oriented. This gives an overall view of the parking lot, the location of the residences. Obviously the truck maneuvering, everything was oriented to the opposite side of the building. This is the same view from the opposite side. So you can see that starting to angle away and how where the barrier is relative to the existing and proposed vegetation. This one is actually from Clymer, just so you understand. This white line is actually the property line, right-of-way line. That's what that's intended to illustrate. So this is near the stormwater basin at the northeast corner of the site. This is looking down Clymer, so this gives a good idea of where that Ready Rock wall would make a much nicer presentation along that perimeter along Clymer. I'll qualify these little humps here are an anomaly. Our intent is not to have a off-road course here on Clymer, obviously. And then the last slide is just a entrance elevation at the north entrance to our property, showing those two fence lines, retaining wall line, what this does screen, what this doesn't screen, relative to the roadway. So again, a lot to digest there, but I'll pause there just for any questions you have or comments.
I have none at this point.
This is Alex, nor do I.
Okay. The next, go ahead.
This is John Swartuck. The sound barriers that you're proposing here, are they similar to what we see along highways like the Pennsylvania Turnpike? They've installed a lot of sound barriers as they've been doing widening of the turnpike. I don't know if you're familiar with what product they use, but is what you're proposing here by any chance similar to that?
I don't know the specific instance that you're referring to. I can tell you that I know that for a fact that the Simtech and the Plywall that's shown on here have been used by PennDOT or in the past. Sometimes when you get into a taller elevation, 12 feet, 16 feet, 20 feet, we're talking about a different product altogether. It's actually a precast concrete with steel support posts. That's what I do see commonly when you get into the higher elevations along the highway. The disadvantage of that is that you're limited, similar to the retaining wall block, into color selection. I mean, it's a precast concrete product, but I don't know if that answered your question. But if you have a specific location, I'd be happy to confirm that.
It looks similar, and based on your description, it sounds like it's a similar product. Thank you.
You're welcome. The other item I wanted to talk about here, just because this has been a big topic, but just an update on where we're at on traffic improvements. So just this first sheet, I wanted to highlight what is required by the Saldo, and it's the frontage improvements along this property line. Matt will hit on this later, but 3 of the remaining waivers relate to improvements along Clymer relative to the offsite improvements that we're showing along Meeting House Road and then the intersection at Meeting House Road and State Road 152. So this is the improvements to the 14-foot wide cartway frontage along Clymer and then the 2 portions that are on Meeting House Road. So that's the requirement. This is an update on what we're showing in terms of the improvements, and there have been a few iterations since we last presented here. So we're showing, and I guess I'll start with Clymer. Clymer isn't being completely ignored. We're removing the access point that's existing, or where this property currently accesses Clymer. That's being removed in its entirety. We did modify the entrances on Meeting House, not only with an island, but signage. We don't anticipate any truck movements towards Clymer, but just to further discourage the accidental northbound turn exiting the property. So that's been updated as well. And then along Clymer itself, there are 3 existing roadway culverts that run underneath Clymer along our frontage. We are replacing those culverts and then regrading the frontage to provide a 2-foot grass shoulder, and then regrade the drainage along the north side of Clymer. So there are improvements along that other than the roadway. And then Meeting House, we're doing a full width, 28-foot wide cartway improvement, basically the entire length of Meeting House. There were a couple of pinch points on this previously. One, we were showing on this offsite area between the 2 frontages on our property along Meeting House. This was shown as 26-foot wide cartway, and that was due to availability, not our desire to avoid the 28 feet, but the availability of existing right-of-way to accomplish that improvement. Since that time, we've had the opportunity to examine land development plans on the neighboring properties there that do allow us with the ultimate right-of-way to show that full 28-foot cartway width. So that is shown along that entire length as 28 foot now. The other comment you'll see in your review package that Steve sent out here last week is there was a question mark, and I just wanted to make clear our commitment. There's a portion of Meeting House in front of Rock Hill Contractor Storage where the frontage was improved previously, and then the other half of it was not improved. We were asked to make that improvement as well. That involved modifying an existing sanitary sewer structure. I know Adam, our engineer from Bowler, and Steve have walked this, and just to make clear, if it wasn't from the review letter, we are committing to that improvement as well. There was also a drainage improvement 200 to 300 feet along Meeting House that was added there. Going down to the intersection, so our last meeting, I know there was a concern, and this was actually why we pulled ourselves from a couple of previous agendas, on getting a response back from PennDOT or getting a PennDOT review of our traffic study. So at the township's request, we submitted our traffic study to PennDOT. We've actually gone through 2 iterations of review, comment, and response to PennDOT and received the most recent response back last week. The township should have a copy of that, but just I'll give the Cliff Notes version of it, as they've asked us to submit the HOP plan now for this right turn lane improvement. They've qualified, and this is similar to McMahon's review letter on the traffic, that if our use is changed from warehouse distribution, which is what we provided in our development narrative as well, to say a parcel distribution center or a cold storage distribution, that's obviously a different use and requires a different analysis, not only in traffic, but under the zoning as well. So we understand that restriction. And then the last comment was on the radius requires approximately 500 square feet of right-of-way on this corner, along with a temporary construction easement, that obviously this improvement can't be qualified on the acquisition of that right-of-way. We understand that. I've actually been in discussion with the Vogels. I haven't advanced it further, but we have an outline on a structure to acquire that right-of-way for this improvement. But there were 2 portions of that study. The first was the right turn lane warrant analysis, which we did trigger. We've always committed to doing that right turn lane design and installing that right turn lane, and that hasn't changed. That's going to make a significant improvement, not just in terms of that movement, but also to widening this throat of the intersection for both entering and exiting traffic movements. The other one, and I know this is a hot button, and it should be, is signal warrant analysis. So we performed a signal warrant analysis with our traffic, and the bottom line is we don't trigger that signal warrant analysis. We obviously recognize that subsequent to our application that there are several other projects in front of the township in various stages of approval that will potentially be sending traffic through this intersection. So understanding, and this was added to the commitment letter and certainly can respond to this, but we did offer a contribution to the township towards a future signal at that intersection. Because even if we don't install it, a recognition that in addition to the right turn lane, that we have traffic that's utilizing that intersection. So we did include that commitment and the dollar amount in there. And then lastly, along that roadway, I guess going back to this slide, utility improvements. So as part of serving our building, the existing domestic water stops here at State Road 152. We're actually extending domestic water and actually fire protection water, not just up to serve our building at the south entrance, but all the way up almost to Clymer, adding 2 new hydrants and a new water main along that roadway, providing access or potential access for domestic water for users along Meeting House. So that's part of this project as well. Lastly, and I'm sure several of them will comment here tonight as well, but we've made multiple efforts to reach out to all adjacent property owners to this site. Obviously, we've had discussions with GA Peak, our neighbors to the west, the Vogels at Rock Hill Storage. Mr. DeSantis was kind enough to spend a couple hours with me and our engineer, Justin from Bowler, on reviewing his stormwater concerns to the north side of this property. Hopefully he feels the same way, but we had a productive discussion and we have proposed to him some additional improvements. I've outlined those there. This is obviously subject to technical approval, but this includes adding capacity to the stormwater management basin opposite his property. So adding additional emergency capacity beyond the DEP or township requirements, adding some additional sumps to these structures and screens to these structures to prevent errant debris, leaves, things like that, potentially entering the storm sewer and coming across the roadway. So I know everybody loves hearing a developer speak for a long time, but I guess with that, I'll turn it over. One of the comments was, what's the benefit to the township for this project? I won't dwell on this for too long, but I do want to have David Babbitt, just an outside consultant that we've engaged. David, are you here?
I am. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yes. So David performed, just to give a general idea of the perpetual fiscal impact of this investment in the property. But David, if you could spend just a couple minutes just going through that analysis, which we've provided as well.
All right. I'm not sure if everyone has a copy of it, but there's 2 big spreadsheets. This is for the township. The top panel shows the number of square feet, the assessment per square foot, $6 per square foot, which is based on comparable new distribution centers in Upper Bucks County. The assessed value comes out to about $1.1 million, which is about a little more than 1% of the total assessed value in the township. The number of workers is projected to be 119. The annual township expenditures is projected to be shy of $14,000. In my view, that's going to be a little bit that's overstated, but that's just a problem with the methodology. It tends to overstate municipal expenditures having to do with relatively small non-residential development. The middle panel shows the different revenue sources. The real estate tax at $8,000. Some earned income tax revenue, very little, because most of that earned income tax revenue gets sent back to the municipalities where those workers live. There's about $5,600 in local services tax revenue, some miscellaneous revenue, most of that's cable services, and some interest earnings. So the total annual revenue is about $18,500, giving us a net annual surplus to the township every year of just shy of $5,000, or about $26 per square foot. Revenue exceeds expenditures by about 34%. It's not huge numbers. Most of that is because your tax rate is relatively low, but clearly the township comes out a winner here each and every year. If we can move to the school district spreadsheet, it has the same numbers on the top, except for the fact that there obviously are no school district students, so the school district expenditures are zero every year. The school district revenue, the vast majority of that is the real estate tax at about $150,000. The school district does get $5 per person, so there's almost $600 in local services tax revenue and some earnings on investments. about $151,000 annually for the school district. And obviously, since there are no expenditures, every dollar of that revenue annually becomes surplus. And together, we're looking at about $156,000 of surplus each and every year to the township and the school district combined. That's the brief version. I'd be happy to answer any questions if you have any.
I have none. Greg, these numbers work for you? As in, do they seem accurate to you?
They seem accurate, somewhat accurate to, yes.
Okay, thank you. Anyone have any questions?
This is Alex. I don't.
All right, why don't you continue?
Okay, and last but not least, Matt, if I could turn it over to you and just go through, I guess, the front end of this, the updated waiver letter.
Sure. Good evening. My name is Matt Chartrand. As Ryan had mentioned, I'm with Bowler Engineering for the engineers working on this plan. And as was mentioned previously, I think, when you saw this application come before you, we had a more extensive list of waivers that we were asking for relative to, some, unique spaces and issues that we had around the site. We've tried to work through kind of as many of those issues as we could to reduce this number of waivers that we're asking for. And we think that what we're asking for now, given what Ryan and David had gone through, with the positives that this project can bring to the township, that, again, we feel that this is the minimum relief that we would need in order to facilitate the development. So Veris Partners had put together a letter dated October 3rd that outlines those waivers. I'll run through them kind of as quickly as I can. And then again, if there are particular items or discussion items that you want to go over. There was also a letter that we received from Wynn Associates dated November 3rd, which kind of speaks to some of those waivers as well, just, whether or not they were in agreement with, or if they had any, additional comments. So if you have a copy of that, along with the waiver letter that Veris had sent over, that'll give you kind of a better picture on what we're looking for here. So again, going back to the October 3rd letter that outlines the waivers that we're looking for here. The first waiver is from section 403.4, and that's to basically not show all existing features within 100 feet of the property. I think, as you can see, even, basically from the plan that's up there right now, we have surveyed, obviously all areas of our property, all areas of the surrounding roadways, all areas of potential extensions, utility areas, where we're making our connections from, where the driveways are being connected to, where, we're doing any improvements, basically. We think, to just kind of blanketly go 100 feet beyond any bounds of our properties starts to put us into a situation where we're going to have to, survey neighbors' properties that really don't have any direct bearing on what we're doing. Certainly from the aspect of, like I said, taking access, taking utilities, any things like that. What we have committed to is any areas that either you or your engineer or any other consultant say, we need more information, or more highlighted information in a certain area. We're happy to provide that. So I guess in this case, it's somewhat of call it a partial waiver, because again, we have surveyed all the areas surrounding and beyond our frontages along Meeting House Road, but we did not want to have to go into neighbors' yards unnecessarily. So that was, part of the justification for that. In addition, in our plan set, we have provided an aerial exhibit that will show, the surrounding area in order to, bring all of that information together. The next three I'm going to kind of bunch together because Ryan touched on it earlier.
Hey,
That's-
Matt.
Yes.
Matt, can you hang on one second? Just going back to your first waiver request. I know we had discussion on this, previous meetings, and there was some geographical term that we were using that could be used to represent your property, and I forget what it was. I think Alex, you had brought it up.
Yeah, that was LiDAR.
LiDAR, that's the one.
Mhm.
And I think we were willing to be acceptant to that, if my memory serves me correctly.
Yeah, and LiDAR, information provided via like a GIS system, we can certainly download that information and bring that in. That would give us some elevations if we needed them, to certain offsite areas. And we do often look at that if we're trying to, take a look at like offsite drainage or things like that that might be coming through. We do believe that we've captured that within the area that we have right now with the survey and the information of what's coming there. So from our standpoint, we do, capture that. And on a exhibit, we additionally do have some of that LiDAR information. So again, we're not really looking at this as a situation where we're necessarily trying to cut corners. We just want to provide the information that's relevant to the site development itself. And we do believe that we have shown that within the plans.
Okay, understood.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
go
the
ahead.
ne- Go ahead.
No, I said you keep going.
Okay, no problem. So the next three, again, I want to kind of bunch together because they all relate to Clymer Avenue in terms of the improvements there. As Ryan mentioned earlier, site access is being taken from Meeting House Road. We're closing our driveway out to Clymer Avenue. We do not anticipate, in terms of vehicular traffic coming to or from our site, that would likely be coming from or to Clymer Avenue, and we're trying to direct that traffic away from it. So again, we think that a better use of resources here would be to shift that those improvements over to Meeting House Road, and especially in areas that wouldn't typically be required. As you can see from the exhibit that's up there right now, the highlighted area in red would be the typical extent of what we would be required, which is along our frontages where we're touching the road. But these three sections, section 506.4A, and that is the overall widening of Clymer Avenue to a 14-foot half cartway width. So we are requesting a waiver there. And again, I'll get into some of the justifications here. A partial waiver from section 513.1, and that's from the requirement to install curbing along Clymer Avenue. We are installing and proposing to install curbing all the way along the sections of Meeting House that we have along our frontage, but the drainage patterns, the type of road that Clymer Avenue is, more of like a local access road. If we were to curb that for that section, it would actually change, somewhat the drainage patterns and the way that things work out there right now, where you just have kind of an edge of pavement. And then again, a partial from section 514.1, which is from the requirement to install sidewalks or pedestrian bicycle paths along that section of Clymer Avenue. So again, when you look at this in totality here of what we're proposing to do, again, we felt that, and I think, some of the discussions with the township staff, I think that there's some agreement in this fact, but that Meeting House Road is really going to be the primary driver to, the access coming to and from this site, the access coming to and from, several locations along that frontage there, that we felt that it was a better situation, both for us and for the township, to focus on trying to expand and put those improvements out to Meeting House Road as opposed to Clymer Avenue. As Ryan mentioned earlier, we are still looking to make some drainage improvements along Clymer Avenue, replacing some culverts that exist there, doing some regrading along the swale along our side of Clymer in order to help facilitate the movement of stormwater easily through that area and hopefully alleviate some of those concerns. But in terms of the physical widening and the curbing and the sidewalk, we felt that was again more appropriate to focus on Meeting House Road. So the traffic impact study, and I'm not the traffic engineer, so if you have detailed questions about the traffic impact study, I may or may not be able to answer them. But in regard to this, they do not have any anticipated truck trips coming from the development onto Clymer Avenue. And as Ryan mentioned earlier, the driveways have been widened out and basically directing that traffic to head eastbound, southeast, if you will, along Meeting House Road to get back out to State Route 152. The next is from section 517.2, and that was to permit a maximum slope of 3 horizontal to 1 vertical, as opposed to the ordinance requirement of 4 horizontal to 1 vertical. Again, this is going to be a private site, privately owned, privately maintained. Some of the areas that would be affected by that particular code provision would be, areas of the berm that Ryan mentioned previously, as well as areas of stormwater management. And what we're trying to do is, maximize the amount of storage area that we have on site when it comes to the stormwater management, to be able to hold back as much water as we possibly can. At a 3-to-1 slope, that allows us to have more volume held within, call it a smaller area. But if we went to a 4-to-1 slope, which we did take a look at, and it does, make some changes to the overall site. It doesn't change the layout of the building per se, or the parking or truck court. But what it does do is likely increase the size of the retaining walls and structures that we would have to have around the site, because again, at a shallower grade, we've got to make that up via the retaining walls. So we felt that a 3-to-1 slope was more appropriate. It is something that, again, there are other ordinances, other municipalities that 3-to-1 is the standard in. It can be mowed, it can be maintained at 3-to-1. And again, this would be, all within the private site and part of our operation, not really from an access of a public standpoint where there would be any issues in that regard. The next was from section 523.6B3, and that was to permit a maximum width of the entrance and exit drives. I think your ordinance allows for 30 feet, and we're taking that measurement all the way out at basically the furthest point, which would be where our curb intersects the curb line or edge of roadway of the street. So that total opening or total openings for the 2 different driveways, one would be 163.8. Again, that's from the start of one curb radius to the end of the other. So, you're not going to see a wide point of asphalt there right at the curbed opening. In fact, I think it's, if you zoom in even a little bit more there, Ryan, you can see where it necks down right at the property line to closer to about 85 feet. And again, that is so that those trucks can make their movements in and out free and clear, not be running over curbs, not be going on to, other properties or things like that. It's just to be able to facilitate those movements in and out of the site. And again, we're not anticipating a public usage kind of thing for this. The other driveway total width is 219.5 feet in lieu of the 54 feet, which is allowable at the curb line. So I'm sorry, the entrance and exit drives, it's 30 feet, I think, at the property line, 54 feet at the curb line. Those measurements that I gave you are at the curb line. And my understanding, again, going back to the letter from Steve Balla in his office at Wynn Associates, their comment relative to that was that was a waiver that they would recommend in order to facilitate the movements of the vehicles. The next waiver is a partial waiver from section 308.C. That's in the stormwater management ordinance, and that's from the requirement to provide storm sewer piping that's reinforced concrete and at a minimum of 18 inches. So on site, what we're proposing is to use a high density polyethylene pipe. This is more like a plastic corrugated pipe, and is very typical for use within these types of facilities. We use them, in industrial facilities, commercial facilities, things of that nature. Typically reinforced concrete pipe we would use for sections out in, state roadways where it's required there. But for on-site, in terms of, ease of installation, in terms of, minimizing maintenance, the HDPE pipe is becoming more of an industry standard when it comes to that. And then in terms of the size at 18 inches, basically everywhere around our site in terms of where we're conveying, say from inlet to inlet, we maintain that sizing, but there are some areas where our roof drains connect from the building where it would be smaller than 18 inches. And again, going from the letter from Wynn Associates, I believe that as well was a waiver that they recommended in terms of the size of the pipe. On the letter from Various Partners, number 8 was stormwater section 308.I.3, and that's to require us to put in an under drain underneath the stormwater facilities. Typically, an under drain would be used to, allow that water that percolates down through to be collected and given opportunity to get back into the stormwater system and or infiltrate. In our case, what we're proposing is to spray irrigate the site, again, as Ryan had mentioned previously. So with that type of a scenario, what you're really looking for is to capture that water, hold it in that detention basin kind of as long as we can, while we use the pumps to spray the other available areas around the site. So there's areas to the north of our parking that we've designated, and other areas kind of around the in the lighter green, if you will, obviously not across our property line, but in the lighter green, where we are going to take that water that's held in the basin, spray it back onto those areas, and allow it to be taken up by the grass, the plants, and the soil in those particular areas. So the under drain in this case actually works against us when it comes to spray irrigation, and that's why we're looking for that waiver. And again, I think looking at the Wynn Associates letter, my recollection, Steve, and correct me if I'm wrong, was that you basically had defaulted to PADP stormwater guidelines, and that was not something that you objected to. And the last was number 9 that's listed on the letter, and that's from section 515.2, and that's to permit shading of the parking and driveway areas of less than 35%. Basically, the exhibit that's shown here shows that we've got, we've tried to concentrate as much of our landscaping towards the outside edges of our site, right? Where we're trying to, buffer against residential, put them along the street lines, put them along the outside edges of our property to minimize that view from kind of all angles of our site. What you see here was an exhibit that we put together that would show what would ultimately be required to try to meet a 35% requirement, which from a code standpoint, I will say is something that I haven't seen very often in municipal ordinances, but certainly within the truck court area, within our parking areas, the trees that you see in the darker gray shaded area would be ultimately what we would need in order to meet a 35% total compliance, but it would completely disrupt the ability to get trucks in and out, parking in those areas, maneuvering through those areas, it would congest that entire section and really force us to likely expand the overall truck court to try to make up for that loss of functionality and area. So what we have proposed to do is to give those trees or an equivalent fee to the municipality that would represent the amount of trees that would be required. Again, we're not looking to back away from that from a monetary standpoint, but from a functionality standpoint and an efficiency standpoint to the way that this site would operate, we think that it would be more appropriate to keep the landscaping again towards the outside edges of the property. And then if the township is so inclined, I think there's a calculation that was done there for the fund, township's general fund, of just shy of about $50,000 that would be offered in lieu of that landscaping.
Matt, how many trees are you actually planning to plant for the shading?
Let me see if I can get to that. And I apologize, Chris, because I don't have that immediately in front of me here. Let me see if I can get to my landscape plan. Let's see if that calculation is shown on there. Sorry, it wasn't on the first plan that I pulled open. So I'm trying to. We have another plan within our set that specifically refers to the shading.
Yeah, I'd be curious to see where you are planning to plant them as well. I know we've given partial waivers on this before, but we've worked with the applicant to make their best effort to plant as many trees as possible to perform the function that they're being required to be there for.
Sure.
Yeah,
it looks to me that we've got, in terms of the landscape schedule relative to shade trees, which would have a total crown of about 35 feet, we've got 48 trees that are being shown around our site right now. Overall, that yields a percentage of shade coverage of about 11.5%. Again, typical in most ordinances, and I'm not saying this in any sort of negative manner, but typical is around 10% for shading within those areas. So 35 is obviously on the much higher end of that. But we've got 48 trees that we're proposing. Now, there are some areas that we looked at to the south and west where we've got, some landscape area there, but it's all basically below those retaining walls that we have when it comes to the basin, when it comes to the southern edge. So there's a fairly significant portion that we don't have the ability to place trees along there and have them actually be tall enough to shade the parking and drive areas. So we also tried to concentrate, if you can look at this plan here. So along the drive aisles out to the eastern side, our driveways as they go out towards Meeting House Road, and some of the discussion that we had with the township staff, there was a request to try to place more of the trees in those areas, and we have tried to concentrate them there. So those areas, those trees that are shown kind of to the north and east of our building are part of our existing landscape plan and are trees that we've committed to installing. The areas that are not, and the areas that we're, more focused on right now is that area of the truck court, where we're showing right now what it would take to get to a compliant 35%. But the reality is that just, completely changes our functionality of the site.
Right. Okay. Thanks.
Okay. So that was it in terms of, the waivers that we are asking for. There were several others that we went through, again, to try to reduce or eliminate altogether. The berm was one of them that Ryan mentioned. We have now incorporated that into the site. We have also reworked our grading around our site right now to try to come up with a more balanced scenario so that the overall site is much closer to what the existing grade is and minimize any, quote unquote, excessive need for soil to come in or to come off of the site. So that waiver went away as well. And again, I think, the monetary contributions that are listed on the letter, when you look down at the bullet points at the back end of this, both from a landscaping standpoint and also from a traffic signal standpoint, would help to mitigate any potential on-site concerns.
Matt, just one more point as well is just there's two waivers that were eliminated here as well related to the afforestation. But there's a decision point that the township needs to make. The ordinance provides for either the afforestation to be accommodated on site or a monetary contribution to the street tree fund. That's a decision by the Board of Supervisors. What I've got up would be, what would be the compliant plan showing those additional areas of afforestation. And then an alternative to that, we proposed a monetary contribution. So it's not a waiver request, but I guess we need a direction on that as to where to update that. So
What area is the afforestation plan to be?
So
go
there's
ahead.
a couple different shades of green here, but basically those green areas that are hatched out on the site and have that pattern within them would be areas that we would need to, in order to meet the afforestation requirement, fully install saplings or smaller trees within those areas, but allow that to grow into fully mature trees. Again, from an overall standpoint, I don't think it would change much in terms of view shed or visibility. Obviously, we've got significant buffering along the residential property lines. We've also got the sound fence that Ryan mentioned previously, and it basically would be part and parcel to a lot of the areas that we're using right now for the spray irrigation. So again, up to the township in terms of how they would prefer to see it, that this be the area where it be highly forested, or to take that monetary contribution and apply that in other areas of the township that may be better suited for that type of afforestation.
No. Did you want to hit on the rest of the bullet points on this letter, or should we move on to Steve's review letter?
I think that's what I was hitting on at the beginning of this, if I missed something, but
yeah, I think
Yeah.
a lot of those bullet points Ryan covered in his opening, but
Yep.
I'd say the first two of those bullet points, the first one there is in regard to the afforestation and where that would be. And then again, noting that we would propose a contribution of $17,250 to the township's forest conservation and street tree fund in lieu of installing all that additional landscape material on this site. And then the second of which was in regard to the traffic signal and a monetary contribution that would be made towards that as well. The third talks about the sound barrier. The fourth talks about the lighting controls that would be reduced in nighttime when the site is not being utilized. It would be reduced to 25%.
All right. So do we want to have discussion on your bullet point issues here next, or do you want to run through the review letter? I mean, we've heard your case on all these bullet points, but we didn't really have any discussion with the planning commission members. So I don't know which way would be most appropriate. I mean, we're talking about them now. We might as well just keep rolling with that and go through these bullet points, and then we'll go to Steve's review letter.
Sure.
Yeah, Chris, my letter more or less just summarizes what Matt and Ryan Hahn have gone over in more detail. So I could certainly hit on these just again as a quick summary, and then if the planning commission has discussion, I guess that would be the time to discuss it. So the first item, well, the first 6 items on my letter are just a listing of what information was submitted. So we'll skip right over that and go to after the second paragraph. So item 1 has to do with the waiver request or partial waiver request for showing additional features within 100 feet of the track boundary. I guess we did talk about that in general. For my purposes, they have provided all the detail that we have asked for in the areas we thought were critical, and they've provided the aerial photograph to the aerial imagery that gives an overview of the rest of the adjoining properties. If the planning commission had any comment on that issue.
I don't, and I know we like I brought up, we had discussion about that, and it sounded like we were going to be all right with it.
Yeah, I guess this is Alex. My only question is there a reason the LiDAR wasn't added to those areas within 100 feet of the property?
I apologize. We do have LiDAR shown on an exhibit. And again, if there's, additional LiDAR information that's needed in order to be able to cover that, we're happy to provide it.
Okay. So what I'm hearing is with the addition of LiDAR, that the planning commission is comfortable with the level of detail provided. Not hearing any objections to that.
Yeah,
We'll move on to number 2.
I'm all right with it.
So number 2, similar to what Matt had discussed, is a combination of the road improvement question in general. So standard road improvements in the township are cartway widening, curb and sidewalk along frontage of property. As discussed earlier, what they're essentially asking for is a partial waiver to not install standard cartway widening, curb and sidewalk along Clymer Avenue, just do the shoulder and swale improvements, but utilize those funds to do a more complete widening and off-site improvements along Meeting House Road, essentially the entire length of Meeting House Road. And as they indicated earlier, we have gone back and forth on this. I did meet on site with representatives from Bowler. So I think we made a lot of progress on that, and they're committing to the 28-foot width, the entire length. So I think that accomplishes what we had talked about in prior meetings for improvements for access to the site. So question back to the planning commission is, is that concept generally agreeable with the planning commission?
Steve, this is Tim.
Go ahead, Tim.
Or so the improvements that aren't being done on Clymer, I know there's some being done on Clymer, but is the additional monies that is being spent on Meeting House correlate to like what would be the fee in lieu of for not doing it on Clymer? Is that what we're saying? We're going to take those funds and put them towards the other improvements on Meeting House?
Essentially, yes. We haven't seen numbers, but I would hazard a guess that they're spending more money on Meeting House Road than what we're waiving on Clymer Avenue. We could certainly ask for that comparison.
Okay.
Ryan, this is Greg Yeager.
So-
Ryan, sorry to chime in, but Ryan, the number I have in
We've done
mind-
that in other
the
projects.
number-
We have those estimates and they're on the order of 3 to 4 times the value of the improvements on Clymer. So
I'm
Okay.
not surprised by that number.
Thank you.
So the width that was going to be choked down in front of the contractor services, that is now going to be out to 28 feet.
Is that correct, Brian? That's what you had indicated earlier?
that's correct. There were actually 2 areas. Is the area where we had to modify that sanitary manhole that you and Adam walked on the site. I just wanted to make sure that was clear, that wasn't shown on the previous plan, but we would commit to doing that. And then there was a 26-foot width in front of these, just between the 2 driveways. But you did provide some of the land development plans showing the availability of ultimate right of way. So we've since updated that to show the 28 feet as well.
So the whole length of Meeting House from State Road to Clymer is going to be 28 feet.
I believe so. That's correct, Matt, right?
That's correct. That's what we're showing.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, just so everyone's clear, it's not exactly a clean one end to the other straight 28 feet because we're working with what's out there. So sometimes I think we ended up with it might shift from one side to the other a little bit. I doubt you'll even notice it when the job is done, but it's not just adding width to one side of the street and going entirely down. I know I worked with Adam to fit it in amongst all the improvements that are out there and make it work the best.
Understood.
Could I ask Meeting House Road, will that be curb to curb with curbing the whole way through?
No. And I don't remember exactly where the curb ended up, but I don't, correct me if I'm wrong, Matt or Adam, but I don't think it had curbed the whole length on both sides of Meeting House Road. It was in some areas you needed it for drainage, but not the entire length.
Correct. Yeah, I think on our side of Meeting House Road, at least, along our property frontage, we have curb there, shown along that portion. On the north side of Meeting House Road, because again, existing stormwater patterns there, where it drains into existing swales, we wanted to make sure that was maintained. So there is no curb shown on the north side of Meeting House Road, just along the south side and along our frontage.
Okay, and then let me ask you this, is that there was a drawing I saw back on January 7th, 2002, C403, in regards to running the water, the 8-inch main down Meeting House Road. My question is, at some point, you're going to run that water main and then run the sanitary, in the valley there, I want to say. Wouldn't it make sense that with 5 foot of width between sewer and water, just to do the curbing sidewalk or curbing down that road? Or that's not a question?
If I think I know where you're going with that, Tony. Correct me if I'm wrong, Matt. The sanitary sewer does not come off of the road. It comes off of the line that runs in between contractor services and this site.
That's correct.
So there is not sewer improvement in the road. But to the other point of your question, Tony, I think part of the reason that they're not showing full curbing is creates other drainage problems along the road. The road's not, with full curbing, we'd need full storm sewer along the road, which doesn't lend itself to that with the room that we have to.
Okay. Okay, and then my other question is that I know, I'm looking at my notes here. I know that there's at least three residents that are between the property there on Meeting House Road. My question is that when you run that water down the street, that main, what do we do about those three residents that will now be required to hook up to water to those houses? And I don't know what the provision is to rectify that.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Greg. The township doesn't have a mandatory connection ordinance.
We do not have a mandatory connection.
If they sell their property, don't
yeah.
they? Or am I wrong?
No, there are certain sections that do, but it's not in this section. There are sections like in the Ridge Road area for the sewer, but not in this area.
Yeah, if they had a failing septic system, or what's it called, substandard septic system, when they would try to sell their property, they would probably have to connect to sanitary sewer. But there's no mandatory connection like right now or for water.
Okay. All right, and then I do have another question about a bullet point before. I don't know if you want me to ask this now or not. I will, and it would be directed towards Ryan, but the concern about the lighting on the street.
Can we wait till we get to that one, Tony, so we can finish this?
I'm sorry. Yep.
That's all right.
Yep. Sorry. I jumped the gun.
No, not a problem. So I guess, are there any other comments regarding the street improvements or sort of the partial waivers based on the extended improvements on Meeting House Road?
I know we had discussion about sidewalk at one point. Does contractor service have sidewalk in front of the property?
Yes, and I believe the last plan I saw, you were extending the sidewalk from contractor services down to the new entrance.
To the southern entrance.
To the southern entrance, yeah. Is that correct, guys?
I believe we're showing sidewalk correct, and I believe we're also showing sidewalk on the north entrance.
So you have sidewalk between the entrances as well?
Not along the frontage of those residential properties. We are showing it along our frontage to that edge, and then widening of the road all the way along the frontage of those residential properties, again within the limits of what we're working with the right of way. And then you can see in that kind of hatch pattern there where the sidewalk picks up again, and it does look like it ultimately connects to where the terminus is of the concrete sidewalk from the contractor services site.
All right, so that would be sidewalk along the frontage of Meeting House that they own, their own frontage, with a connection to contractor services. There is not adequate right of way to do sidewalk along the residential properties.
Okay. All right, that's my last question.
Okay, I guess we should move. Oh,
yeah.
Is there another?
Yeah, I mean, in my opinion, this is what we had talked about before, and this is what they're showing to us that we had looked for. So I'm comfortable with it.
This is Alex, as am I.
John, I agree.
This is Andy. Sounds reasonable.
Tim, I agree as well.
All right, go ahead,
Okay.
Steve.
I guess that's everybody. So my third item is their item 5 from the Veris letter. It's a discussion of the 3-to-1 to 4-to-1 slope issue. I guess what they provided was an alternate plan grading the site at 4-to-1, which ultimately the change is that the retaining walls get higher, and they modified location of the truck storage, sort of flipped it from the outside of the loop road to the inside of the loop road. Correct me if I'm wrong, guys. That's more or less the extent of the changes on the site with the 4-to-1 slopes, correct?
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's,
those were the primary changes that we made. It didn't, affect anything else in terms of the parking or the building or the main truck court areas, but it did, like I mentioned before, and you just mentioned as well, Steve, just increase the height of the walls that we would need to place there in order to meet that requirement.
Okay, and just so I'm clear and everyone's clear, what is Veris's preference? The 3-to-1 slopes with the original plan, or this alternate plan with 4-to-1 slopes?
our preference is what we've shown. What this plan is intended to illustrate is that this doesn't affect the building size or the coverage. We would just do a slightly different layout. I think the positives, we get a generally, more gentle slope on those basins, but it increases the footprint of those basins by nature of the slope, and then increases the height of the retaining wall. So that's what you have to balance here.
Yeah. So
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that the preference was the original plan, not, you weren't proposing to change the plan, you're just showing that as an exhibit.
We will change
Yeah.
the plan if, if push comes to shove, but
Right.
we wanted to show we could accommodate it.
yeah,
And-
3-to-1 is still the preference there, Steve.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to be clear on that. And I guess second point, more maybe for the benefit of the planning commission, the ordinance, while it does have the preference for 4-to-1 slopes, that there are some provisions in there where if the planning commission agreed to the 3-to-1 slopes, they would, essentially requires either retaining walls, which they are proposing in a lot of areas, or confirmation from their geotech that the slopes proposed won't have a stability issue. And I think we've done that also. They've added stabilization, erosion control matting on most of those slopes to make sure that growth of vegetation is held in place and we don't have any erosion problems.
We have, just so you know, Steve, we have a proposal from Geotechnology Associates to do a slope stability analysis as well. And in conjunction with that, obviously, we would launch that, based on confirmation of the 3-to-1. If it's not necessary, we wouldn't do that analysis. But
Right, that makes sense. I just wanted the plan commission to be aware of, what's asked of someone if they are asking for the 3-to-1 slopes.
This is Tim. What about the long-term stability of the retaining walls? Excuse me. The long-term stability of the retaining walls. Is there any kind of assurances that we get on that, or how does that, what happens if one of these huge retaining walls fails 15 years down the road, like blows out on a Clymer Avenue or whatever,
Well, they're ultimately the retaining walls have, generally not done at this level, but they'll have their own structural design plans and reviews for building permits. The plans are noted up that they have to provide shop drawings, which are essentially the engineered drawings for the retaining walls, and they'll be based on the soil stability in the area and have proper footings, etc. And for those proprietary walls, the segmental block or even the other block walls that they were looking at, the ready rock walls, they often have their own engineers which specialize in those types of walls that will do the certified drawings for you.
Yeah,
I'm sorry,
I would anticipate that there will be structural, design element and information obviously provided to the satisfaction of the township for those walls. I will say that the walls themselves would not be, call it, adversely impacted by whether we have a 3-to-1 slope in the basins or a 4-to-1 slope, throughout the site. The walls themselves will be designed independently of those slopes and any potential bearing upon them. So it's a good question, but one would not affect the other.
Matt, this is Andy. Could you clarify that again? So you're saying that regardless if it's 3-to-1 or 4-to-1, the wall would be the same, including the height?
No, the height would definitely be different.
Okay.
But in terms of the material, the workmanship, the foundations of those walls, they're not going to be using the slope necessarily to reinforce any portions of that wall. The wall themselves will be standing on their own in terms of how they would fit in structurally. So whether or not we have at the base of that wall a 3-to-1 slope going down into our basin or a 4-to-1 slope going down into our basin it will affect the height of, but it won't affect, I think the earlier question was, would it affect the stability of it long term? And my answer to that would be, no. But again, in terms of what the township needs from a structural standpoint, in terms of signed and sealed drawings or things like that, I'm sure that that can be provided as part of this.
Yeah, my question wasn't with regard to the slope indication on the long-term stability of the retaining wall. It's just basically the long-term sustainability of the retaining wall itself.
Sure.
I know there's been, for example, there's up at State College at years back, there was a big wall right on 26. It was about I don't know, 25 or 30 foot high wall that ended up, I'm sure it was engineered, I'm sure it was everything, but it failed and therefore blew out onto Route 26 out by the Nittany Mall. So I'm just saying overall, like ongoing, like do these walls deteriorate or is there anything, that down the road, 20 years or whatever, are these, is there potential for these to fail? And if there is there any recourse that the township would have at that point to, remedy the situation?
Again, I think we can, have a structural engineer. Ryan mentioned Geotechnology Associates. They do a lot of wall design as well. We've worked with them pretty extensively when it comes to that. So if there's some information that they could provide relative to that, I will say with time, with experience, with all of these things, they continue to get better and better when it comes to the type of materials that are being used, the drainage behind the walls now, putting, weep holes through in order to allow, the hydrostatic pressure that might build up on the backside of the wall to come out. Those are all things that are part of a more modern design. I can't speak to what was designed 30 years ago and installed. Just the same as you see some sites you go to and you think that there's a pavement section down there and you dig into it and find out it's just, 3 inches of asphalt laid on top of dirt. And it doesn't have, the base course and everything else that we now have as standard types of construction materials that just cause, failure that much sooner. So I think in terms of the way that they're designed now, the materials that they're designed with, there's a lot of factors of safety that are built into it, and it's a much safer, more stable situation. So again, we have as much need, if not more, to be concerned about a potential failure, because if that were to occur, it would completely disrupt the site, potentially have some other impacts to the building and other things. So it's incumbent upon us to make sure that is the case as well.
Just to add to that, Tim, at least the two wall type systems that they've suggested earlier tonight are both pretty well proven wall systems, so I don't have concern with that. As far as would the township have any recourse, it limited, it is private property, so we don't keep, maintenance requirements on a lot of things on private property. But if it impacted certain features, if it impacted the entrance, if it impacted the basin, if it failed near the basin, we do have some control over those with our maintenance requirements. So on a limited basis, we would have some recourse.
Okay. All right, thank you.
So I guess what we get back to is the question of, is the planning commission comfortable with them proceeding with the 3-to-1 slopes, with the retaining walls and structural engineering and the geotech report as we just discussed?
Personally, I would rather see a lower retaining wall.
Could I just clarify there that the retaining walls grow in height with the 4-to-1 slope, not vice versa? Because that grade is shallower, so that to make up that differential, we end up with a higher wall. But sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted to make sure that was clear.
No worries. Yeah, thank you. So yeah, I would say, if I had to make a choice here, I would want a lower retaining wall. And seeing that they can build this within the ordinance at 4-to-1, I would opt to go with a lower retaining wall at 3-to-1.
I guess my thought, Chris, is they're still having to get a waiver for the height of the retaining walls. If they were to reduce the building size, could we reduce the height of those retaining walls? Even if it's not fully to ordinance, at least something a lot closer. I think that may also help with the afforestation issue.
I'm not sure what you mean, Alex. That they don't need a waiver for the height of the retaining wall. I guess it's a ramification of the waiver is the height of the retaining wall.
I thought there was a requirement for no more than 4 feet on a retaining wall.
No, where I think the 4 feet comes in is that gets back to the balancing of the site. I know where you're going with that. Sort of a combination of how it's looked at. I think the ordinance is written that they try to keep everything to 4 foot, no more than 4 foot cuts and fills. But we've interpreted that to balance the site to make the grading not excessive cuts or excessive fills in and of themselves, and that they have balanced the site.
Okay.
So yeah, this is Tim. My thought would be if the site can be, accommodated within the ordinance, but yet a waiver on the 3-to-1 versus 4-to-1 would be a reduction in the height of the retaining wall. I would be more for that as well.
This is Andy. I agree with Tim and Chris on that.
John, you have any?
This is John. I'm fine. I agree with what was said.
Okay, thank you. All right, Steve, go ahead.
Okay, that brings us to a much easier one. My item 4 has to do with the driveway width. I think they've proven they need the additional driveway width to make the truck turning movements, so the trucks aren't swinging out, blocking both lanes of traffic to get in and out of the site. That's essentially why they need those large return radius. Going back in time, I believe one of the reasons that we had these limitations on driveway entrance widths is so we don't end up with the old-fashioned gas station or convenience store that just paved the entire frontage of the site out to the road and people could drive in and out wherever, without controlled entrances. So I think they have made, these are the smallest entrances that they could do and accommodate the truck traffic in a safe manner.
Gotcha.
Is everyone all right with that item?
I am
This
all
is
right
John.
with that. Go ahead, John. I'm sorry.
I'm still, how do you discourage trucks from making a left-hand turn coming out of this exit that's shown?
Yeah, so you can see what Ryan just highlighted there. There is a mountable concrete island that's now placed between the incoming and outgoing traffic, and you can see that island itself is somewhat skewed towards sending the traffic to the right. And obviously the curb line that follows as well as you're heading to the right allows for the truck to make a much easier turn and movement in that direction. Certainly, we think vehicles that are going to be servicing us and coming to this site will be coming off of the state highway and going back that way as well. So that's what we've done to try to facilitate that. Obviously, there is still an ability, if needed, to make a left there. If it was, vehicles or workers coming to and from the site, they would be able to make a left if needed. Emergency services would be able to make a left if needed. But in terms of truck traffic, we've really done, everything that we could here to try to skew this and sort of encourage, if not force, the right turn movement.
Is that just paint or is that raised?
No, it would be raised. It would be a mountable concrete that, if a truck's tires or whatever were to go up over the edge of it, allows for that to happen if need be. But, in terms of our turning movements there, that widening of it allows for that truck to not really have to go in and run over curbs and run over sidewalk and light posts and everything else. So that's the reason for the waiver that we're asking for in terms of the overall width, is just to facilitate the fact that the trucks can get in and out without having an additional encumbrance there.
So 3 or 4 inches, something like that?
Typically speaking, yeah, a mountable concrete curb has a shallower, call it, inside height dimension. It could be 2 inches, 3 inches, and then it generally slopes upward to about a full 6 inch or sometimes 7 inch reveal on the back side of it. So it's got like a tilt to it, that if the tires of a vehicle were to roll up over it, it wouldn't be as significant as hitting, a 6 inch or 8 inch vertical curve.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Matt, that's the lower entrance. Is that correct on Meeting House Road?
The entrance that's being shown right now is I don't know what you're referring to as the lower, but this is the one that was closest to the state route. The other entrance has it as well, the one that's closer to Clymer Avenue. So we've done that and have that angle. You see, it's not directly perpendicular to the roadway. It's skewed as such, again, to try to push those vehicles a little bit more to the right.
Will there be signage out there that those trucks leaving can only make a right out of your facility?
There is signage that's shown within that island. I don't know exactly what's shown on that post, Ryan, or do you have any concerns about showing it as a complete restriction?
No, and frankly, going that direction is a wrong turn for the trucks, so it doesn't benefit us to have trucks maneuvering that way either. There's no reason for them to be going that way.
Unless the other way was blocked.
Right.
But
I don't have a concern restricting that on truck movements.
Matt, is this, are you still proposing that this is a 24-hour facility? Is that what you're saying?
Ryan, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, we're proposing not to have a restriction against that, is the way I would phrase it.
All right, so that would be a 24-hour facility. Okay.
I don't know that the users will operate 24 hours, but we're, in terms of a leasing restriction, it'd be consistent with the zoning ordinance here. So I'm not trying to mince words here, but it's just not adding a restriction to the hours of operation.
All right, so, okay, well, we could say that it would be 24 hours, 7. Okay, and then, I have another question too, is that, the street, in regards to the street lighting as well, is that, we talked about this earlier, but the, street lighting, those 2 entrances on Meeting House Road would be, lit 24/7, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, because we talked about earlier that there would be motion lights and such on the property, but the lighting would be lit at those entrances and cast light on neighboring property. Would that be correct?
No, those poles would also have that lighting control. I mean, we have flexibility on that, but we propose that all those poles along that driveway would also have that. In addition to the shields, addition to the cutoffs, they would have that end light control system. So it's hard to see on this plan, but all of these yellow light fixtures. I mean, it's somewhat of a balance. I mean, you want people to be able to see the entrance and not miss it, but at the same time, recognizing, any potential light pollution. But our going in intent that would be, those would be at 25% lighting level under normal operation.
Right, well, there's concerns with the residents that in the event that they miss the entrance, now they're continuing on down to Clymer Avenue and there's no, improvements to Clymer and, now you got tractor trailers down there. That's always a concern. And that's why I was asking you about the lighting.
The only
The
thing
other-
if you wouldn't mind, I just want to clarify, because you mentioned that the residents, if you zoom in even a little bit more on that driveway, Ryan, I just wanted to make note that the only area where there's even minimal light spill from those lights at the driveway is out onto kind of the area of the entrance at Meeting House Road. So if you look to both the east and west, where our property boundary is to the residential property to our east, all of those values, now those are foot candle levels based on the lighting that's provided here. All of those levels at the property line are shown as 0. So there is no light spillover from that driveway into or onto the residential property, and vice versa to our west. As you get down towards Clymer Avenue, you can see where those lights, have all trailed off to 0 values there as well. So the only area that really would be lit is the area of and surrounding the driveway entrance itself. So I just want to clarify that, only because you made mention of it, that there would potentially be spillover, not in any of those directions.
And to clarify that, Matt, I mean, those numbers are based on the 100% lighting level, not the 25%. The beauty of this control system is the going in assumption, and we're open to either, is that this would be at the 25% normal level. If it did become an issue, we could change one of these fixtures to, to 100%. We could turn it on, we could turn it off, we could turn it to certain hours of operation. That's an instantaneous change. It's not a set it and we have to get an electrician out there to update it. It's something that could be, modified if it becomes an issue. But
no, that's a good point, Ryan. That even those numbers that are shown there are based on the 100% lighting value.
Okay, and in regards to the traffic as well, but in the traffic report I looked at, I just want to confirm that there's that you're proposing 119 employees, is that correct?
That's the modeled assumption. So they base this on ITE codes for warehousing distribution. So that's what's modeled. Yes. And frankly, that's what our parking is set up to accommodate as well.
Okay. So the 119 employees are going to come in any direction, just as argument's sake, per se.
Correct. We don't know where those employees are going to be, where they work from. I mean, we know where the trucks are going to, and it's to the interchange, but the employees, it depends on where the hiring's from.
Okay. And then, one other thing I'll leave you with this is that the exhibits that you showed, at Meeting House and State Road in regards to the traffic improvements, I looked through my packet. Were they submitted? Because I don't have them.
This wasn't in the most recent packet. This was in a previous one, but I certainly can issue this concept plan if you don't have it.
If you could, please.
Yes. And just to clarify, this is Tony.
Yes.
Okay.
And I have no further questions. Thank you.
All right, so we're still on item 6. Correct?
Yes. Was there any other comments regarding the driveway width or entrance exits?
I will take your recommendation on that, Steve.
And I think with what we discussed with the mountable curb, the direct truck, and the signage, which we could work out, what the signage needs to be to restrict truck traffic. Those are beneficial improvements.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think a sign is definitely beneficial. I certainly appreciate the efforts with the mountable curbs. I think that'll help, and I think a sign would really help to seal the deal. Anybody else? All right.
This is Alex. I agree. I think the signage would be important on that.
All right, why don't you move on there?
Okay, I'll move on. And I guess I'll just add one more comment here in between. I realize we're picking these off one by one, and in the end, you're going to have to look at this as a package arrangement. But for the purposes of getting all our comments in, I think it's okay that we keep going one by one on these, acknowledging that sometimes things overlap. Like Tony just said, the lighting sort of overlaps the entrances, overlaps the buffering of the neighbors, and everything will work together.
That's why I didn't stop Tony.
Yeah,
It all it's kind of homogenized throughout.
So the next items, which were 7 and 8 on their letter, all have to do with stormwater management. These are issues that we have granted for other industrial developments, and not to let the cat out of the bag here or anything, but the stormwater ordinance that we recently updated like a month ago, actually took care of some of these items. So our ordinance now is more geared toward meeting the PADEP best management practice manual. So that ties together the like the spray irrigation systems and the no under drains in the basin and things. That's all permitted under the recently updated stormwater ordinance. The one waiver that would remain that's not covered under the update we did is the HDPE pipe as opposed to the concrete pipe. But as I indicated, that has been permitted on other private storm sewer systems.
Yeah, I agree. We've done that more than a handful of times. It's on their site. It's not in the right way.
Correct.
Yeah.
The next item gets back to the trees, the parking lot shading. I think they went over that well. They showed the exhibit of where the trees would have to be. I think everyone could agree you can't plant all those trees in the truck area of the parking lot. On prior projects, we have asked for that calculation of what the maximum trees would be. They've provided that. They've provided what the equivalent cost would be. We've done a few things in prior projects we've asked them to install elsewhere on the property, but I think with some of the other discussions we had, there's really not a lot elsewhere on the property to plant trees. So it was 111 additional shade trees was the deficiency. And correct me if I'm wrong, Matt, but you're providing. Oh no. The shading in the.
I apologize, Steve. You froze up on me. I'm not sure if it froze up for everyone else, but right
Yeah.
after you started to say, correct me
Okay.
if I'm wrong.
What I was asking is this. Yeah, my question was, are you meeting the shading requirement in the vehicle parking area? And we're really only talking about the deficiency in the truck parking area?
I guess I can't say specifically that we are meeting it 100% within that area. We have, as you can see here, on the areas towards the outside edges, we've provided the trees in as much as we can. The areas where you see gaps between them are areas where we have light standards that, that obviously we can't have the trees that close to the light or they end up affecting each other negatively. So we've shown that along the outside edge. We can only take a 50% credit for those trees, that half of the tree is overhanging the parking area. But again, those will be fully mature shade trees installed. And then
Let me state it a different way. The waiver request is primarily for the truck parking areas. Okay.
Very much so, is primarily for the truck areas, and we believe that we tried to plant everywhere else that is reasonable and available to us to create that shade condition along the parking and the drive aisles coming into and out of the site. So we do believe that this is the minimum relief that we would need here, necessary.
Steve, this is Alex.
Okay, so I guess, yes.
The original intent of that was to reduce heat islands or to cool stormwater before it gets discharged?
All of the above, yes. Yes, it was a stormwater
Okay.
issue, it was a heat island issue, it was a,
Would
low
using
impact
some green
development
roof,
kind of thing.
would using some green roof be able to achieve some
It
of
would
that?
certainly offset that. It would certainly offset that issue.
I would just comment that we did change this roof from a EPDM or a black EPDM to a white TPO, which goes in conjunction with reducing that heat island effect.
And this is a sloped roof, is that correct?
It's a gabled roof, so there's a center ridge line, half drains towards the auto and half drains towards the truck court.
Okay, right. It's not a large flat roof.
Yeah, so probably not so suitable for greening then.
This is Andy. This is the one that I struggle with. I mean, at 48 trees that are in there and 111 not, that's 30%. So, that was a decision that was made here. I mean, it's not close. So I'm looking forward to more discussion on this to hear, what we could possibly do. I see what's going on. Obviously, you can't put the trees in the middle of the truck bays there, but you know, the requirement was 35%, and it's
11 plus.
11 and a half.
11.5. Yeah, again, I think a lot of what I had noted earlier as well in terms of, you know, where we have retaining walls placed towards the outside edges of those drive aisles. And again, that's to minimize the need for extensive grading out into, and, you know, potentially pushing that even closer to the property lines there. That really restricts our ability to put specifically shade trees below those retaining walls there, where if that condition didn't exist, we could potentially line, you know, both sides of the roadways coming in and out, which would obviously increase the percentages that we have on our site. But we have tried to, you know, maximize towards those outside edges, work with the existing landscaping that's out there to keep as much as possible, as well as, you know, place new street trees out towards those outside edges. So we're not looking at it as a, you know, trying to cut cost, as you can see, when it comes to, you know, a potential contribution back to the township in order to facilitate that elsewhere. Unfortunately, just with the physical circumstances of the site that we have, we're placing it everywhere we can, but those areas below the wall wouldn't meet the requirement. Like, we wouldn't be able to get the shade from those trees. It's unfortunate, but that is the reality to it. So I do believe that we've tried to meet the intent as full as possible in every area that we can place them.
And Matt, this is Greg. You made the point earlier that 35% number is a massive number, right? Relative to, you know, industrial warehouse distribution parking facilities.
Yeah, certainly from an industrial standpoint, I have not ever encountered that type of a requirement. You know, we have seen it in a few municipalities. One in particular, I think Hilltown may have a 35% requirement as well. And you know, we have had to deal with that on commercial sites that again have more, you know, islands and things that might be able to accommodate that. But in this scenario, especially because, like I said, we can really only take 50% credit for a tree that is on the edge of a parking area like that, that even greatly reduces the amount of the percentage that we can, you know, get out of this. So we're only placing them along the edges. We can only ever get to 50% on each tree. And then therefore any other gaps are going to just continue to further depreciate that number. So again, I would hope that you could look at this site and see that we are proposing quite a lot of full-size shade trees along the edges of the parking, along the edges of the drive aisles, along, you know, the areas of buffering to the residential properties, along Clymer Avenue, along Meeting House Road. I mean, all in those areas, we are not skimping on or asking that the township, you know, grant us something less than what we have shown, but it's just impossible to achieve in terms of the functionality of the site when it comes to the internal. So my hope, based on what we discussed here tonight, and you know, the offer being made to give that monetary value back to the township, and if there are other areas that can benefit from shade trees, if there's parks or other areas in the township, that can obviously be used towards any of that.
Matt, what's going on the back side, the west side of the truck area? Does that drop off outside the parking area?
Yeah, right. So to the south and to the west is where we've got probably our most substantial, retaining structures there. So that's what I noted, that while there might be a gap between that wall and the edge of our property line of some landscape area, even if we placed a shade tree there, it wouldn't meet the requirement of the ordinance in terms of shading within the actual paving.
What about on the edge of the paving? Like you're doing out in the front parking lot?
Yeah, so in those areas there, we don't have a retaining wall kind of right off the backside edge there. So the problem that we have is there's obviously a narrow space between the edge of the curb and the edge of the retaining wall. There's no way that we could place a tree in that space. It wouldn't survive. B, the root structure of that tree would ultimately grow into the wall and potentially compromise it. So that's not something that we would be able to entertain, is placing a tree between the edge of the curb line and that wall. On the north side, in the parking area, we don't have a wall directly there, so those trees can be placed within those areas.
And just, I guess, to piggyback on that, Matt, on that south side and specifically that southwest side, this is preserved woodland areas just outside of that retaining wall. So this goes up to the existing flow line that comes across between us and Rock Hill Contractor Storage. So it wouldn't make sense to clear trees, to plant trees there that preserve the existing woodland along that corridor.
Right. That's a great point, Ryan. But again, not something that we can take credit for in terms of a percentage calculation, but that is being maintained and would provide, additional shading for what's there.
I was just looking at the ordinance while we're talking. You could take credit for that if those existing trees are close to the drive aisles on that side. You could take credit for those towards your shading requirement.
Does it have to specifically overhang the?
It has to be in the vicinity. I mean, if they come as close to the driveway as you would plant a new tree, I think you could get some credit for that.
Okay. Well, I'd say, we can go out there and look at individual trees and try to see what, is being saved and what that comes out to. It may increase that percentage minimally from what we had it before. But I think the offer stands in terms of what was presented. Again, we're not looking for a reduction there. Ryan, correct me if I'm wrong, but we're trying to do as much as we can with what we have.
Yeah, and I guess I'd make one more bullet point on that. I mean, some of this is not. This is an industrial use. So you've got a truck court on the back of the building, and by the very nature, you need truck maneuvering area. This is a industrial use by right here. So where the relief is being sought is whether or not this truck court is this entire size or half this size. I mean, you can get the idea. The percentage is still the same. So maybe the quantity gets bigger, but that's where the challenge comes in. But
we are certainly to the south and west, and even to the east where we have those retaining walls there. That does encumber our ability to place more trees within the area. But Ryan brought up a good point that along that, call it the southeastern corner of the site where those existing trees are, in order for us to do that, we'd have to tear trees out to put new in. So I don't think that would solve much in terms of this. And again, it would be mere percentage points as we're looking at this, but we're not going to be able to get close to that 35 overall percentage number. So again, hopefully the township can look at this and see that we're not trying to skirt a responsibility other than to make it functionally work as best we can.
Matt, this is Alex. Would it be possible to plant more trees at the south end of the building? in that area between the drive and the wall of the building? Right in there, yep.
Yeah, it would be possible. That is part of the area that we are using for spray irrigation.
Okay,
So, part of what we're trying to do is, in the areas that we can maximize the amount of intake of that water to the grass system that's there. So the more trees that we plant, the more we've got to kind of, snake that through. The root structures and everything else, again, could have an effect on the spray irrigation system that's installed. So that's why we were trying to keep some open area there, but push those trees more towards the pavement surface so that you get the benefit as much as possible of the shading.
Any other comments?
This is Tim. I mean, I think that's probably just a question. I mean, so regardless of the fact that the 35% is a large number, it's our ordinance. So, and it's not being met. So, I think that's going to be a point of contention for some of the members. I mean, a reduction in the building size would allow you to do that.
I think that's exactly the opposite. I think that's the point that Ryan was just trying to make. If you had a building half this size, you still wouldn't be able to comply with the 35% or even get near it. And so that's, I understood from the last couple of planning commission meetings that was a concern for the planning commission in the township and maybe the neighbors that we were trying to put 10 pounds of stuff into a 5-pound bag. And that's just simply not the case. This project complies with, just to get it out on the table, it complies with building coverage, it complies with impervious coverage, circulation works, stormwater management works, everything works. What this is, I think it's an anomaly. I think this is an extremely high requirement for a warehouse distribution facility. And I think if you had the opportunity and had a planner sitting next to you, if you were to redo the ordinance, this ordinance provision would be completely redone, maybe cut in half, maybe more. So that's why we can't comply with that ordinance requirement.
but it is an ordinance requirement.
I would agree from the standpoint of what Greg is saying, that because it's a percentage of paved area, it really isn't driven by the building size. It's driven by any paving that we have. So drive aisles and so on and so forth. But anything that we have lining those drive aisles, we can only take 50% credit for the shading from that tree. And that's where, it's just a percentage working off of that. So even if the area of the truck court was reduced, or the areas of the paving were reduced, it would reduce maybe the overall number of trees that we needed to install, but it wouldn't reduce the percentages likely from what we are showing.
It would provide more area to plant more shade tree, though.
Right. Yeah, like for example, in the back of the building there, if you took that pavement back up off that western edge and you had a row there that the trees could be planted in that wouldn't infiltrate the retaining wall, or then potentially, undermine or die, undermine the pavement or die because they didn't have enough room to grow. If you had that whole area, you had a whole row of trees around the whole back property line.
I would respectfully disagree that the shading is over the pavement area. I guess regardless.
So you get 50% of a whole line of trees across the whole back property line. Should be a lot closer.
Yeah, but you need a 130 foot to maneuver a truck on a warehouse distribution use on the property. So that's the point we're trying to make.
But Ryan, if you took
Understood,
the
but the building size
130
is
feet off
smaller.
the building.
I'm sorry?
If you took the 130 feet off the building, you'd have the room.
So in other words, you say the 130 feet off the building, we have to have 130 foot of pavement to maneuver a truck up to the building, whether the building is 10,000 square feet or 20,000 square feet. That pavement area, the length of the building times 130 feet, we have to get 100 or 35% of that pavement area covered with trees. That's, that's what I'm trying to illustrate here, is that regardless of how big that truck court is, you're trying to cover it with 35% trees. That doesn't matter if you're planting trees off the property out here. That doesn't count towards our shading.
I think the concept that planning commission members is trying to explain is that if your building size was reduced far enough, you still have your 130-foot width of parking lot. The building size itself was reduced to expose more of the southwest side of the property to allow for planning on the whole edge of your truck parking area.
So let me ask the question: if we plant shade trees or we plant trees off the pavement like this, that would count towards the parking lot shading then? Is that?
I would assume 50% of the tree would, from the conversation I've been hearing.
I think that's only if it's right up against the pavement. Correct me if I'm wrong.
And that's what I'm suggesting. I'm pretty sure that's what our planning commission members have been leaning toward. If you line that up,
If you took 20 or 30 feet off the building, okay, and moved the whole thing, shifted the whole pavement back 20 or 30 foot towards the interior of the building, you would then have a 20 or 30 foot strip along the whole south or the southwestern property line where you could plant a line of trees all the way down it and only have this gaps for the lighting. And you could take 50% each one of those trees. Now, would you get to 35%? I don't know about that, but you would be a lot closer to 35% than 11. That's my point.
I understand your point.
That's just my point.
I think it's
That's
the
all I
point that we all have in the back of our mind. I mean, we've definitely waived shade tree percentage, but we also expected an effort for the maximum number of trees, that we get on the property. And the percentage that we've come up with in the past that we've waived is a lot higher than what you're showing us. It was a lot closer to our ordinance. It wasn't our ordinance. We still waived some trees, but it was a lot closer to our ordinance numbers than what you're proposing.
Just to kind of go back to the very first meeting, where's a fenced in portion along the south part, along the bottom of the building? What part is fenced in? Yeah, no, not the wall to prevent, but actually for security that prevented somebody it was a security concern. I asked it in I think the very first meeting. To prevent somebody from driving around through the back of the building there, right? Isn't there fencing along the bottom part for security? Oh, there you go. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So this would, just for clarification, this retaining wall, this is cut into the slope here. So the fencing would die into this, but it effectively serves the same purpose as fencing. There'd be fencing on top of this for fall protection, but the
Right.
bottom line is enclosing the truck court area.
Okay.
I'm getting the distinct impression that we're not coming to a general agreement on this one comment. Maybe we move on to the other comments and leave this one for the moment as an understanding we're not at an agreement.
That's fine. Yeah, let's move on.
Okay. Well, the next one happens to be trees also. So that's the afforestation requirement. They showed on the plan, there was an exhibit they showed that had the sort of medium green or gray green shading. that they could do afforestation on the property if they filled in essentially all the spray irrigation areas with the tree planting that would be required for afforestation. Just as a note, both these sections of the ordinance, the parking area trees and the afforestation tree, does have written into the ordinance the options. It's at the discretion of the township, but it does write in the options for contributions for trees or planting trees in other locations in the township. So their offers are in line with that. I think their offer was option in the they could do the plantings in these areas or they provided a contribution estimate in their response letter.
What was the concern with the spray irrigation? With the tree plantings? With the
Just that
afforestation plantings, I'm sorry.
Yeah, just that, obviously they're going to start out small because you're going to, plant in the afforestation areas a much smaller, sapling that's going to go in. But eventually, it's not going to be that way. It will grow, the roots will extend, and ultimately it will, start to affect the lines of the spray irrigation within those areas. So, that was the concern relative to it.
So like underground piping could be affected by tree roots?
Correct.
Gotcha.
I mean, the one other thing that I would note in this case, obviously afforestation is meant to try and get additional wooded areas. While they can meet the letter of the ordinance or the area, the letter of the area required, providing in all these areas doesn't really, get what the township would desire as a monolithic block of a wooded area. And in a way, I think the overall maintenance of the property will be easier and better maintained if it's not entirely planted in small saplings, hoping it to grow into a wooded area, especially down in the basins. It's going to make ultimate management or long-term maintenance of those stormwater management basins a lot harder if it's entirely wooded on the side slopes of those basins. Just another consideration.
Yeah, it definitely does increase overall maintenance requirements. Like you said, it's going to be dropping, leaves and such into the basin areas, which is going to have to require constant cleaning. It's going to, get into inlets and other areas there that, again, will become a maintenance challenge, certainly.
Yeah, we've been most successful with afforestation when we had, again, say in a residential development that has a large open space chunk, and we're able to take what was a field and add it to a woods line, and extend out an acre or two of woods and be able to protect it up against existing woods. That's where we've been most successful in doing that afforestation, just as an example. West Rock Hill really doesn't have any areas of afforestation. It's a newer ordinance, and we haven't had a development that required it.
So this is not reforestation. There's no trees there now.
Well, it's sort of the same section of the ordinance, whether you want to call it reforestation or afforestation, but you have to, the basis is you have to meet a minimum coverage on a lot. I think they're not cutting down all the trees, so it's afforestation. If they cut all the woods down, they'd have to reforest. It's wordplay, but it's both the same section of the ordinance, whether you want to call it reforestation or afforestation.
But I guess to that point, we're not clearing we're not clearing a forested area
Right.
here to develop this. There are some areas on the site that have some existing trees and tree stands, but the vast majority of the site is open.
Yeah, if we go back to some prior meeting discussions, anyone that looked at the site now, there's a lot of overgrown areas on the site, but we went through the exercise of going back through historical imagery, and when it was farmed, at one time, and it was very limited wooded areas on the site, and that primarily was along the water course on the, I guess we'll call it the southern side, in between this site and the contractor services site was really where the mature woods are. The rest of the site is secondary growth and overgrown areas. So this gets us to the same, same sort of bottom line as the shade trees. Would you accept a fee in lieu of installation?
Keep talking about light bulbs.
Steve, may I make a comment?
Sure.
Is it possible that this could be done without with reforestation waivers?
I'm not sure if I understand what you mean. Well, they could do it without a waiver if they do every square inch of the property with the afforested areas.
On that property with the parking lot the way it is, with replanting, reforestation, they can do that without the
Correct,
waiver?
Matt? That's where you're showing those sort of medium green areas on the property would meet
Correct.
the standard.
Right. We would have to fully, plan out all of those medium shaded green areas in order to achieve it. But that ultimately would achieve the area that's required.
So I guess the answer to your question is, Tony, is yes, they could do it. But what I suggested in my comment earlier was, I don't know that it's ideal to do it, but they can do it.
Okay. What?
Matt,
Oh, go
sorry,
ahead.
Go ahead, Tony.
No, I'm wondering what's in that case. Then why are we requesting a waiver when, in fact,
They're not. Technically, they're not. They're asking whether you'd prefer them to do the trees or take a contribution, because the ordinance allows you to take a contribution.
Okay, well, there's a lot of trees over there. That's what I don't understand, how the calculation came to be. But okay. All right. Thank you.
Matt, how
Yeah.
much of the property area is in that green shading that would meet the afforestation? Do you know?
Yeah, Ryan, is there a chart or a label there that we can zoom in on? Trying to see. Yeah, it's up at that top portion. So 115,000 square feet.
2.5 acres.
Yeah. 115, 414. Yeah, it's about 2.65 acres of land. Plus then the existing woodland to remain, which was noted at an additional 32,000. So about, 3/4 of an acre.
Can that exhibit be sent to Greg, please, as well?
I think
Sure.
that's in your packet.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if you got it in color, Tony, but that was Exhibit B attached to the Veris letter that I think I included when I sent you my letter.
We
Yeah,
can
so
send,
those two numbers, the green, the light green and the dark green, come up to like 20.06% of the total property. The 150,
Yeah, that
32,
that would be right. 20%
yeah,
would be the
32,
minimum.
154, 115, 442 divided by the 735, 549 is like 20.06. So I mean,
Yeah,
in that instance, it's almost like the slopes thing with regard to the height of the retaining wall. I'd be more inclined, the fact that they can do it on the property, I'd be more inclined, for that one, if there's going to be a contribution, they have the ability to do it on the property. Like you said, Steve, it's, is it the, do we want that? Is it really the ideal situation? And probably not, but they do have the ability to do it. So therefore, that might be a more reasonable, situation in my mind.
Yeah, Tim, I see where you're coming from there. I'm trying to read this plan. I need better glasses.
I can send a bigger version of this as well.
You need a
So you
bigger,
don't have to, yeah.
bigger screen. So the on your legend there, it says that the light green is existing woodland.
Right. Existing woodland down at that southeastern corner of the site, or southwestern, southeastern corner of the site right there. So that's an existing wooded area that we're going to maintain.
I'm sorry. Can you point it out somehow?
Yeah. I can't. Ryan can't. Yep. He's circling it there.
Okay, so I thought that was a forestation area.
No, it's the other green.
Okay, so it's a
You can
darker
tell the
green.
difference. The other green, which basically covers everything else.
Right. Okay, well, that clarifies a little bit for me. Thank you. So along that basin, not the basin area, the waterway, I guess that is, between you and contractor services, you'd have afforestation intermixed at one point or alongside of the existing woodlands. And there's going to be little saplings. Is that how that gets done?
Yeah, under our ordinance, it's not planting 2 or 3 inch trees. It's planting the little saplings and protecting them and letting them grow up to create a natural habitat.
Right.
That's the concept, anyway.
Right. Yeah. How often does that work?
Like on Augustine Road.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you take Augustine Road, it works about 40% of the area that we plant.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, that's right, Tim. That is the example of doing that.
Yeah, it paid off.
Well, I think the deer tore into that.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying. I mean, about, is it the best situation? And, the fact that they can do it is, it's demonstrated, but, is it the, ideal situation that we want? And I would tend to think that it wouldn't be, but again,
I would agree with you. It's not an ideal circumstance for that type of planting.
like I said, they do have the ability to do it on site, and in my mind, that just becomes a little bit different situation than the shade trees.
Yeah, I agree with you, Tim. Any other comments, thoughts?
This is John. I guess with regard to this and also the issue with the parking lot shading, I mean, a tree in a forest becomes part of a woodland habitat. A tree where it doesn't belong just becomes an eyesore that eventually dies or gets cut down. I mean, I'm all in favor of, enforcing the ordinances for the good of the township, but planting trees where they just logically don't belong for the sake of meeting the ordinance, I'm struggling with that.
And quite frankly, John, that is the purpose for having the ability to grant a waiver when it just doesn't work or just doesn't make sense. That provision in the subdivision ordinance allows you to make that modification.
And I agree, and I think it's appropriate in this case to apply that.
Yeah, I think I'd also agree with Steve that if they were to plant up everything around the basin, ultimately it's going to cause far bigger problems with leaves jamming things up than you're going to have from not having the trees in this
Right.
location.
Yes.
Yeah. And that coupled with if the trees do grow, they can tangle in with the spray irrigation infrastructure.
Chris, may I ask, the question is that, is there going to be a property maintenance, person over at that facility 24/7? In the event, because as you mentioned about the spray irrigation, that's been a thought in my mind is that, in the event, wintertime, freeze thaw, whatever, who maintains that? And, because as we know, it goes into the, detention basins, and then if it overflows, it goes there and across the street to Patrick DeSantis' property and, or the Vogel's property. Is there a property maintenance manager? Because at one point in time, I thought I heard that, somebody was going to be there. It's just a question.
We're going to engage a full-time property management firm. That doesn't mean somebody's full-time stationed at the property. The occupants of the property, would be there just like any other business. But we would, in addition, have a property maintenance service, whether that be a CBRE, et cetera, that would have a property manager that regularly checks on the property and responds to emergency calls.
The one thing that I would add on top of that is that as part of our MPDS requirements, which we'll have to obtain, obviously, the MPDS approvals associated with this, but there are operation and maintenance requirements to all of the stormwater BMPs that are going on site. So in terms of going on and checking, to make sure that inlets are free of debris after major storm events, and that there are regular requirements that are listed on the MPDS permit and the plans that do require that. So that's kind of an additional, call it belt and suspenders to what the township requirements would be from an operation and maintenance standpoint, but the MPDS does require that as well.
Is there, so there's a local, somebody you have in mind that's local to be able to monitor this facility? Would that be correct?
Yes, but I don't want to create the illusion that they're actually working out of this facility via a local property management firm.
What would be their time frame? Like if there was a problem, you know, one of the detention basins, you know, overflowed, there was a problem. What would be the time frame roughly?
And I wanted, Matt, if you could, after this, just speak to overflow. I don't want to create the illusion that just because the pump is getting repaired, that this all of a sudden floods the property on the redundancy. But in terms of the time frame, I mean, to me, it would be somebody that's within a 30 to 45-minute radius max. I mean, because frankly, I'm not that it's not something that needs to be addressed, but the bigger issue is if we have a fire pump flow or something like that, or an emergency such as that needs to be responded to in the night. That's, we have to have somebody that can respond to that quickly.
And just for clarification, that on all these stormwater facilities, on any of our new development, they sign an operation and maintenance agreement with the township. Not that we're out there doing regular inspections, but oftentimes after storms, we do inspections. But if the township got a complaint, we would then contact the developer, and if they, or whoever the maintenance people were, and if they didn't act, the township would have the ability to do an emergency repair or emergency action if they needed to. So that's one sort of backup system that the township would have the ability to do.
Yeah, and I guess for Ryan's earlier point, there are a lot of factors of safety that are kind of built into the stormwater design as it relates to, the amount of kind of additional storage above what would be the maximum requirement, which in most cases is the 100-year level storm. Obviously, you guys are well aware we get, more and more of the larger storm events. So we want to make sure that those facilities can operate and fully function under that type of stormwater flow. So there are, we've got basically an outlet structure that has a at the top of that outlet structure there, you can see where the 100-year water surface elevation is, and it's tough to tell there, but it's just below the grate elevation at the top of that outlet structure. So if it were to ever exceed that orifice that's at the bottom of the outlet structure, you then have a fully open grate at the top that could take that water and take it through the system out into the drainage swale, and then ultimately through the culverts that we are improving across Clymer as well, which is generally the direction of flow for most of the water that's coming from our site. On top of that, there's an additional emergency spillway that if that needed to, it would then flow down the backside of that, again, captured into the drainage channel and discharged safely across the street through the culverts that are designed there. So there's additional factors of safety beyond just the storage of the 100-year water surface elevation for that. The reality is the majority of storms that we get are more in the 1 to 2 to 5 year levels that won't even come close to filling those basins to that elevation.
And what I wanted to speak specifically to, Matt, is this basin, it's not just holding water, it has to be pumped down within 7 days of the event. So that's through the spray irrigation pump. If there were an impairment on that could be switched over to the winter operation, which is basically discharging, for lack of a better term, through a garden hose size, so that basin continues to drain even if that spray irrigation pump is temporarily out of service. So
that's right.
Steve, are we still at 100-year flood? I thought that was reduced by DEP.
No, our stormwater management requires that the overall stormwater design is based on 100-year flood.
Okay.
And just, I will just add to what Matt was saying. This is not, I mean, other than the spray irrigation component, this is not an unusual stormwater basin design. It has the overflow and the emergency capacity that we would require on all stormwater basins.
The question that I have is that, again, with the stormwater is that, when it overflows, and I saw in the engineer's report is that, with Patrick DeSantis with his property on the other side, if he does not comply with what you're proposing to enlarge the inlets on the other side of the street, what happens then, or what's the plan then? Because it's all based on overflow. So then what do we do then? Is my question.
Just to clarify, we're not changing the inlets on the other side of the street. This overflow, the elevation over the 100-year storm goes into the existing outlet pipe. You know, should a storm event actually exceed that 100-year storm event, and I'd qualify that we actually added 18 inches to get above that 100-year event, or we're committing to do that, just to even add additional redundancy.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Matt. The stormwater design on the north side, actually on all three of the basins, is designed to discharge a relatively small percentage of what the pre-development flow is. Is that correct? At least as the rate of flow.
Yes, in terms of rate, you're 100% correct. And you know what Ryan had noted earlier, that a lot of that volume is getting recirculated back into the site through the pump system that we have for the spray irrigation. So you're taking, you know, a percentage of that water, pumping it back into the site, allowing it to infiltrate more at the surface level than at a deep level directly from the basins themselves. So yeah, I also agree with your statement, Steve, that this is, you know, a very, call it typical design, but we have built in some additional factors of safety here, I think, relative to the additional storage above the 100-year event, if needed, that can be accommodated. And just to go back, I made a comment earlier that, you know, we would need an NPDES permit. This project actually received an NPDES permit back in, I think, August of this year. So, you know, in terms of their review of the stormwater, that has been addressed with the Conservation District and with DEP.
So I imagine you may, depending on what the final design is here and any modification, you might have to do a modification to that permit for the final plan.
Yeah, I mean, I would think that there'd be like a very minor amendment to any, you know, final plans that we have here, at least as a matter of course providing them. But if our stormwater design itself has not changed substantially, then typically there's not much of a review in that regard. Certainly, if we were changing the basin design to 4-to-1 slopes like we talked about, and those sorts of things, and the basins were, you know, changing in terms of their footprint, they'd want to see and review all of that. But if functionally it's equivalent, then we'll get an updated letter from them that says that they've, you know, reviewed it against the final plan.
Right. My point was just that they'll be provided with the final documents, and if there's any modification necessary, that'll take place.
Yes, 100%.
So I think we strayed.
Yep.
I think we were really close to having everybody agree that it did not make sense to do the afforestation on the property. Is that a correct statement?
I would support that.
I think we heard from everybody but Andy.
I would be okay with the contribution in lieu of the afforestation. It makes sense, or based on what you were saying with the roots, with it clogging, with maintenance, et cetera, that seems logical.
Okay. All right, then. So I think we got through that one. The other three comments in my letter aren't waivers. They were, discussions of those other points that Veris was making. So just to touch on them again quick, was they believe they've improved the buffering between the residential properties by modifying some grading to get the berm and the sound fence in, plus adding the sound fence on top of the wall facing Clymer Ave. So I think the questions there are, ultimately the township they're offering the township the ability to pick the design of the fence and possibly the retaining wall also. Number 9 was the dimmable light system, which seems to be an improvement over no controls on the lights. And the last was, what we talked about before, the cut fill, the balancing of the site, so there's not a need to import or export an extensive amount of material from the property. So I think from a waiver standpoint, we have consensus, let's put it that way, consensus on all of them except the contribution in lieu of parking areas shading trees. And I guess I'll give you one other option. As you're just a recommending body, while you've always made definitive recommendations to the Board of Supervisors, you can pass a option onto them to make the final decision. They're obviously making the final decision anyway, but your recommendation could be no decision on that item, or whatever it may be. But I'm just saying, if there's only one item that's hanging you up, you can move a plan with that one item. That said, we're in a little bit of a weird situation in that they didn't submit a fully revised plan because township staff and the applicant wanted to concentrate on these questions, which would be a major impediment to not have these answers. So I'm not exactly sure what Veris was hoping to get out of tonight, other than this feedback that you've received from the Planning Commission so far. What are your thoughts on that, Ryan?
Can I guess before that, can I ask a question? And I don't mean to belabor the shade tree discussion, but we talked about, planting this area with trees, and my read of the ordinance, if these aren't over pavement, these don't count towards our shading percentage. Not opposed to adding additional shade trees. I've got a couple ideas on how we can even add more, but they're not going to be directly over the pavement, which I believe is the way the ordinance reads. Is that how I understand your interpretation?
You're correct in the interpretation of the ordinance. I think where the Planning Commission was going was that on other projects, they've given some leeway to, planting trees in other areas on the site. I think that's where the question came from.
And that's where I'm hung up on it, is that I think our fundamental issue here is planting trees in the middle of an active truck court, versus planting those, in a green area of the site. But I don't know, it's different for afforestation versus parking lot shading or shading of the pavement. I think I follow your reasoning behind that, Steve, but that's what I wanted to understand.
On a more simple example, we've had projects where they're short 5 trees. So the solution was, well, why don't you plant the extra trees on another area of the property, and then there's no contribution, and we call it even. So there was circumstances like that in the past. This is obviously degrees higher of the numbers that we're talking about.
Steve, is there any type of credit for the type of roof they're using?
I mean, it's not written into our ordinance, but it certainly could be a justification if the planning commission felt that was, you know, a good improvement on the property.
Well, it's, you know, it's providing the type of protection.
A similar benefit, yeah. A similar
benefit as the shading, you know, the shade trees.
We could also change some areas to concrete paving in lieu of asphalt to also reduce that heat island effect.
Right. Yeah, I don't think we want to come across as the super eco people, but you know, it's why we have that ordinance, is for the heat problem. And that's why I like to see as much as possible in the appropriate area. But I'm again, you know, the effort with the roof, and I don't know how much more benefit you get from changing your sidewalk materials. I don't know. I've never really dealt with it before.
I'm saying changing this to concrete paving versus asphalt. Or yeah, something along those lines.
Yeah.
Where we can't accommodate the trees.
Okay. Yeah, I follow that. I thought you were talking about something different there. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
No, I mean, that would certainly have a benefit. Concrete over macadam for heating.
Well, I guess to cut to the chase, Steve, you were asking, I mean, our intent was to request, you know, this has been in front of the Plan Commission for close to a year now, preliminary land development approval, but certainly we'll take direction as to next steps as to how to respond.
What do we have outstanding, Steve? Besides shade tree.
I knew you were going to ask that. I dug up my old letter. So the last full review letter I have, I was scanning through it, but you know, most of the comments revolve around these waivers issues. And what the township's opinion on the buffer plan. If you remember, that was always a major concern of the township, was buffering of the residential properties.
Sure.
Beyond that, I mean, we have the issue of water line approval from Telford Borough Authority, sewer approval from Telford, and the sewage planning module, which is actually, they've submitted the paperwork. We've held it up because the township generally doesn't pass on a planning module to DEP until we have some level of plan approval. The traffic study and the improvements out at the intersection of Meeting House and State Road was a major item. We've made progress there. We have the feedback from PennDOT. We have their commitment to the right turn lane. The improvements along Meeting House Road was a major concern. I think we've talked through that extensively tonight of what they're offering to do. Stormwater management is essentially done. Landscaping, that goes back to the waiver questions.
Did we ever get the generic report from our traffic folks? They were gonna put together something incorporating this project and some others that are being proposed.
Yes and no. We did at the time, which didn't have as many projects as we happen to have now.
Yeah, right.
And the answer was, in the short term, no, a signal was still not warranted. We actually have asked, the township has tasked them with sort of reanalyzing that on a bigger picture level. But now that we have a few new projects in, but they did at the time that question was answered, they did provide that feedback.
Okay.
And we have reviewed the different traffic studies, including the study that went to PennDOT.
Steve,
Yes.
may I just ask a quick question? Is that, what is the amount of trips per day to that facility? Well, I mean, maybe not ask you, but, if I could
Yeah,
ask
I don't know.
Ryan, it's that, because I have a lot of notes here. You know, it's 24/7, whatever. Could you tell me like what your anticipated trips per day is?
I don't have that at my fingertips, but I can follow up with the traffic study that has those counts, and probably more impactful on the traffic light in those studies are the peak hour trips, and how those are dispersed. But
Yeah,
I
that's
don't have it on the fingertips, but I'm happy to send that traffic study again.
that's what I was just going to add. The traffic studies are really based around peak hour trips and trip generation rates more than sort of the layman's thought of how many total trips per day. You could probably suss it out of here somewhere, but I don't think it's an easy thing to just point to.
No, that's what I was wondering, because I have the traffic analysis. It was in my packet and I was looking at it, but it's really not clear. I mean, are you, is it one tenant that you're proposing for that building, or two, or multiple use?
Sorry to interrupt.
Go ahead.
I was going to say it's designed for up to 2 tenants. It could be 1 tenant, full building use.
Okay, 1 or 2, and then the loading dock space, is, when I looked, it was 30 some loading docks. Is that what you're saying?
There's an ability in terms of that dock wall on the number of doors. The going in specification is for 18 doors. So 1 door per 10,000 square feet, which is a typical metric.
Okay. And that's per both units, or
That's the total building. Yes.
okay. All right. I mean,
But ultimately, Ryan, that could go up to 44 bays.
Yes, I mean, it's more in terms of that accommodation on number of doors, in terms of flexibility as to how that lays out relative to somebody's interior racking plan and layout. But yes, I mean, ultimately there's future knockouts all the way across the back.
And Ryan, the traffic impact study is based on square footage of the building, right? Not necessarily the number of dock doors.
Correct.
Yeah, I think I found, Tony, in the study. They actually break it down to average weekday and average weekday, like AM or PM peaks. But again, as was just indicated, based on the square footage of the building, not the number of bays or anything, the average weekday truck trips would be a total of 112, and that's actually broken down into 56 entering and 56 exiting. So not 112 distinct trucks, essentially 56 trips in and out. And then there's a passenger car, which would be, essentially equivalent to how many employees are on the property. And that approximated 113 in and out. So that's similar to the 119, maximum employees that they anticipate for the facility.
Yeah. Okay, so let me get this right. I have 119 employees.
119.
And then I have no, the build out is 119 employees. Is that correct?
That's estimated, yes.
Okay, and then I have 112.
Well, actually 56 truck trips.
56. Okay. Okay, and okay. All right. So let me ask you this. The building, let me ask you this. The building, I guess, is supposed to be pallets that you're putting in there. If I have if I have 56 trucks in and out,
It
stocking that building at 186,000 square feet, how does that relate to the cargo that's coming into that building?
It depends on the user. What we can rely upon is the ITE data, which is study of thousands of typical users that's based on. But whether it's pallet storage, whether it's floor storage, there are different business types. I would use it as the same as the other existing industrial buildings on 152. There could be different tenants 10, 15 years from now. The best source that we have to model that is the ITE data and how that's used. I will comment that typically there's once the building is stocked with material, it's so many turns per year. I mean, I would say, typically that might be 10 turns per year. I'm probably not giving your exact answer, but I'm trying to describe, how this type of property is used.
No, I know a question came up back in the summertime when you were in front of the planning commission. If there was a projected user of the building and there wasn't, you stated that you did not know who was renting or who was processing that building. And one of my questions back then was if that building became a warehouse or flex use, because that would change, as Steve knows, that would change that dramatically on the parking, the employees. It would change a lot of different things. And one of my concerns is that if you don't know who the intended use is, it changes a lot of the stuff as far as planning commission is concerned.
Yeah, and I would say that this type of building, occasionally there's manufacturing uses that come into this building as, this type of property as well. This isn't, in our narrative that we presented, it's not a manufacturing use. That's not what our traffic study says. That's something that we would have to remodel to submit if that were the case. It would change, to your point, it would change the parking percentages, et cetera, but that's, there's an interior build out associated with that, a building permit that would be, we would need to address that prior to.
Yeah, Tony, I think we had a lot of discussion about this in the initial submissions, because I believe the application came in with the potential for different use categories. And after discussion, it was agreed that they were going to limit it to just the warehouse, the warehousing use, period. Which would mean if someone did come into the building requiring or proposing a different use, it would have to go back through zoning approvals and potentially a revised land development plan, depending how extensive any changes would need to be made to meet the zoning requirements. So I guess our check would be, when these people came in for the building and zoning permits for the fit out of the building, we would know, at that point, we would know who the users are, and be able to control whether, they were in fact a warehouse use or some other use that required a different level of approval.
As long as we have that documented.
Yeah, the plans clearly state that it's warehouse use, and I'm sure our approval documents will clearly state that. I didn't misstate that, Ryan, right? That was the agreement.
No, that's correct. And you'll see that in the PennDOT comments as well. There are different use codes for different occupancies in addition to the zoning.
Who monitors that over time?
Well, in part, the township will, because they'll be getting different zoning permits for different users in the building. So the township would have the ability to enforce that if they saw a change.
All right. Tony, you satisfied with the answers?
Yes.
All right, let's keep moving.
And Steve, I would just note that relative to the letter that you brought up earlier, Steve, obviously, with the exception of the waivers that we have gone through extensively tonight, any other items in your prior letter are all items that we either have or will comply with.
Thank you.
Steve, to piggyback off of that, I guess we're in a spot now where I don't want to speak for anybody, but I guess we're in a spot now where we came into tonight's meeting hoping for a recommendation on our preliminary plan. I think we made a ton of progress. I hope others agree. I think what we're left with undecided is the shade tree solution. And I guess one of two things, one of a couple of things, maybe it's more than two things. If we could get some direction on that, in terms of a recommendation, something the planning commission would be satisfied with, and come back and show the planning commission. That's one option. The other option is to take your thoughts of proceeding to the supervisors with some sort of, maybe not a firm recommendation, but some sort of, I don't want to call it a non-recommendation, but, suggesting that the supervisors, take it upon themselves to consider what's appropriate in the absence of a clear recommendation from the planning commission. We could go in either direction. I hate to, we've taken up, 3 hours of your time already tonight. And I hate to do that to you again if we can avoid it.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure we can figure out the trees. I don't like passing the buck. What were you gonna say, Steve?
I was gonna say that I think we need to clarify one other thing. In the past, Veris had distinctly requested an action on preliminary final plan at one time. If we're truly looking at this as a preliminary plan, which then gives you the opportunity to clean up some of the final issues later. That parking lot tree issue could get pushed to final if you were going to move on it as just a preliminary plan.
I will, I guess, say that I previously requested a preliminary plan approval and I was rudely interrupted by one of my colleagues requesting preliminary final. So to clarify that, so preliminary plan unless you have a strong disposition, Greg, otherwise.
So we don't have your new revised plan, correct? Is that
You have
Correct.
all the exhibits, you have all the exhibits that I think we presented tonight that were in support of or in relation to the waivers.
right?
What we would ultimately need to do is then file a call it a compliance plan, with any other outstanding comments from Steve's earlier letter. But, that would effectively be a conditional approval conditioned upon, besides these waivers, us agreeing to and complying with any other open comments from the township.
All right, Steve. So how do we word this? If we just do this as a preliminary, how are we wording that?
It would be subject to the outstanding conditions in my August 4th letter as amended by the waiver discussions of tonight, with or without determination of the parking area 3 waiver.
Okay. So planning commission members, are we comfortable, uncomfortable with preliminary tonight, based on Steve's motion? Proposed motion.
This is John. I think, to be honest with you, we kind of owe it to the applicant to give them a little more clarity on the parking lot shade tree issue rather than to just kind of defer it again. And since I have the floor, and my suggestion would be just the same way for the forestation issue, we leaned on the side of doing what makes sense rather than doing specifically to the letter of the ordinance. We chose the option of fee in lieu of. For the parking lot shade trees, the applicant, I think, has made a good faith effort up until now to make the plan workable. So my suggestion would be for the parking lot shade tree issue is make a good faith effort to recognizing the township's concern, but at the same time, do what makes sense. Come back with that plan, and the township would accept a fee in lieu of for the difference. Those are just my words.
Yeah, I follow you.
Yeah,
John,
and this is Tim. I mean, I would tend to agree with you, John, and I agree. I mean, it's not the point of the shade trees, making sense where they're going. I get that. It doesn't make sense, and I don't think that they should do it. My point was the one way to accommodate it more so would be to reduce the size of the building. And I think that's the whole point of anybody that's talking here about trying to get towards that 35% number is the one way they could do it or get closer will be to reduce the size. I think their efforts on everything else have been commendable. I think they've done a great job from what we were asking for, buffering, that type of thing. But that's my point. I would go along with what you said though about the best efforts to get towards that, and at that point accept the fee.
But maybe I'm misunderstanding. My interpretation is, even if there was no building here, there was only a parking lot. In order to shade 35% of the parking lot, you have to plant trees in the middle of the lot, which doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I mean, it's like
independent of a
islands
building
and
or
stuff.
not.
Right.
Because
I
we
think
already
it's-
said if you plant trees elsewhere on the property, they're not shading the lot. They would count for the reforestation clause,
Right.
not for the parking lot shade tree clause.
You know, Ryan had made a comment earlier, but would it at all factor in if we did the areas that he had kind of overlaid and shaded there in terms of, you know, where we could put concrete along the loading areas and the truck parking areas, you know, that you could just visually look at it and see that it's well over 35% of those, you know, the truck court, if you want to call it that. You know, it's probably, you know, again, eyeballing it closer to 40% of just that area itself. If we were to agree to do that, and again, in the spirit of cooperation along with the other work, would that move anyone on the board?
I guess to cut you off, Matt, a little bit on that, I appreciate kind of where you're going on that, but rather than calling an audible here, I like the overall discussion. I think you and I have a handful of ideas resultant from this discussion, and I think we can come back with a best efforts plan that improves that, you know, and meets the intent of the ordinance in terms of heat island effect reduction, adding additional trees on the property. But I want a chance to discuss that with you and to actually submit something in writing versus kind of audible, and if that works for you.
Yeah, no problem. I apologize. I
Oh,
just
of course.
was interested in just trying to get feedback on it, but I agree with you, Ryan.
All right. And I'll be reporting this to the supervisors next week, so they might have some input as well.
If I could just comment on that, that kind of thinking is helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you don't want to give us an answer today and don't commit, you want to go back and look at it. The fact that you're willing to go back and look at it is helpful.
No, we've heard you loud and clear. So we will take another look at this.
All right. So is everyone satisfied with that?
Chris, real quick, Ryan, if you could also provide again that exhibit on the traffic study at Meeting House and State Road that you provided.
Yes. So after we hang up, I can't do it at the same time I'm sharing screen, but I'll send you an email with both that concept plan and the traffic study, so you have it.
Yes, if you could send it to all, not just me, all of us.
Yep.
Yes, please do that.
Thank you.
I've seen that before. I thought I had it in my packet here.
It came out. We actually sent this going back April, May. So, but I'm sure we've all slept a few times since then. So I'll send it out.
All right, thank you. All right. So planning commission members, are we satisfied with the discussion, the route we're going to take here?
So just to clarify, Chris, that route is we're going to wait for a plan to be resubmitted, a preliminary plan.
Well, I think we can recommend a preliminary, a conditional preliminary, from what I understand here.
I just wasn't sure if we don't actually have a plan, or are we just working off the old plan? That's what I'm trying to understand.
Well,
I think you could work off the old plan, right, as modified with the exhibits that we recently submitted. And to get past that shade tree issue, maybe, Chris, maybe if we could satisfy, I don't know, to Steve's satisfaction, to the Board of Supervisors' satisfaction, with a notation of what we intend to do to modify the plan to address the shade tree issue.
Well, again, if we're doing this as a preliminary plan, I think we have the Plan Commission has a lot more leeway to have a few vaguer, issues, because you're going to see it as a final plan, as a final cleaned up plan, to verify that all those issues have been addressed to your satisfaction. So to answer Alex's question, I'm more comfortable with it being a preliminary plan, acting on the last version we had with their commitment to comply with all the issues, except as amended tonight. The final plan, I wouldn't necessarily be that, have that same opinion.
As a matter of protocol, we should take public comment before voting on a recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was going to suggest that too. Thank you. Because there's a lot of
Yep.
people that have a lot of comment to make about this project. Thank you.
You're welcome. So here's what we'll do. We'll make the motion, second the motion, then we'll have public comment before we vote on it.
One thing I would ask for in the public comment would be if any of the adjoining neighbors have any thoughts on the screening wall. I'd be curious to hear what their thoughts on that are with regard to the type of wall.
Right. All right. So somebody want to put a motion together? Would be a conditional, recommend conditional preliminary.
This is John. I'll recommend conditional preliminary approval.
Can I get a second?
This is Alex. I'll second it.
All right. So now we'll open up for public comment. Greg, do you have any email?
Yeah, John Romeo. I don't know if he wants to speak or if he wants me to read it. I guess I'll read it. John Romeo. A comment, obviously surrounding residents will not be able to exist in their homes as planned when purchased due to light pollution, truck noise, traffic, and diesel fumes. After hearing monetary contributions in this meeting multiple times, I have to ask, do you ever offer monetary contributions to the surrounding residents for having to give up peaceful, quiet surrounding that they now have? Also, he said, if there's no room for the required amount of trees, seems obvious the project is too large and needs to be scaled down. The next one is Monica Riley. I don't know if she's on the call. Does she want to give her public comment? I will read it. Monica Riley, 917 Cat Hill Road. Did the traffic study submitted to PennDOT take into consideration the other two proposed warehouses that will also dump onto State Road, along with the proposed Wawa at State and Meeting House? How many trucks do they expect coming in and out daily? Michael Brodeur. Is Michael Brodeur here? I'll read Michael Brodeur's. The issue of runoff during the winter, which ice accumulation is prevalent on Clymer at the bottom of Meeting House, and Clymer is significant, let alone the increased runoff due to the impervious surface. Who's going to maintain the drainage pipes, and where exactly will they be discharging the water? What will the project sound coming off the hill to the surrounding area in decibels, please? The Meeting House Road will need to be widened. Who pays for this? What are the actual guarantees trucks will not drive down Meeting House on the Clymer and vice versa? The financial impact for neighboring houses will not only be detrimental in making it hard for such homes to be resold. What are the diesel and oil spill containment provisions? He also asked, what is the height of the sound walls versus the trucks? The diagram does not appear the sound barriers will be higher than the elevations of the trucks along Clymer. I wish to have this clarified. He also goes on to say, I wish to formally request an explanation to why these meetings are not held in person. I wish to have a statement formally documented for the record. This has been asked for before with no response. Those are all the emails I received.
Okay. Well, if there's anybody in the audience that wants to make a comment, please hit the hand icon. Otherwise, we're going to move forward. All right. Seeing none. We have a motion that's been properly seconded.
Steve,
Chris, hang on, hang on.
Jackie Willard raised her hand.
Oh, I'm sorry. What?
Yeah, there's a couple.
Yeah, they just
That's
popped
not
up.
coming up on mine. I'm sorry. Just popped up.
Yeah, they just popped up.
Oh, now I see him. Okay, I'm sorry. All right. Jackie Willard.
Once again, Jack Willard here. My wife I'm working on my wife's computer, so it's her email address.
What's your address, sir? I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry, 2900 Clymer Avenue, Telford, Pennsylvania.
Thank
you. I've been listening tonight, and the question is, the fee in lieu thereof, is that going to reduce the heat that comes off that parking lot? First question. Second question is, if surrounding areas have such a better ordinance concerning the shade trees for the parking lot, perhaps those are a better location for this project. And third, I heard them speak about the benefit to the township, but at what cost to the residents? And in reality, the residents are the township. I'm not expecting answers, just my thoughts. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, Teresa Link.
Hi, I'm Teresa Link. I live at 119 West Branch Road. Just a statement today, for me to pull out and make a left on to 152 took about almost 8 minutes at 6:50 this evening. I don't know where the traffic study is coming from when it's 6:50 at night. Also, I'm a little concerned about traffic when the trucks are going to make a right on Meeting House. What happens if they miss Meeting House? Then they have to go down to Quarry Road and make a right onto Quarry Road and then go up Clymer. So I'm very concerned with the width of Clymer Road because it is near impossible to pass two small vehicles on that road right now, let alone a truck and a car, or two trucks even, with all the other buildings that are happening. That's it.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? One raised hand. Yep.
I went to hit mute.
Thank you. All right, anyone else? Okay. Seeing none, we have a motion on the floor. It's been properly seconded. Any further discussion between planning commission members? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. So, Ryan, I guess I'll report that we're recommending preliminary to the supervisors next week. You guys are going to do your homework, get some things cleaned up, and come back and with a shot at preliminary final, or at final at this point.
We appreciate the time and comment, and we've got a list of additional items to address, not only from the Plan Commission, but the resident comments. I appreciate everybody taking the time.
Yeah, well, please do take those neighborhood comments into effect. All right, anyone else? We're actually going to move on. All right, next on the agenda is new business, Percy Regional Authority. What do we got there, Greg?
In your packets, you have an email from Pete Anderson requesting a letter from the Planning Commission. This is back in September. They needed it for a grant. I wrote a letter to PRA, Percy Regional Authority, explaining why I thought the Planning Commission would approve such a letter, and the reasons being that Tabor Road, where they have wells that are with contaminants of PFAS, that you would approve it because the people can't drink out of their wells. It is in a water territory that has already been granted to Percy Regional, and the Board of Supervisors approved this in a public meeting. I said that's why I thought you would approve it. However, you should officially approve it if you so wish.
Well, I would approve it. You guys want to have a discussion about that, or should we just make a motion to approve it?
I'll make said motion.
I'll second it. That's yours, John.
Who wants it? I'll give it to Alex. I thought I heard him. All right, so John made the motion. Alex seconded. Oh,
Tim
I'm
made the
sorry.
motion.
And all right, who seconded it?
Alex.
All right, you got that?
John just overtalked him.
Okay, thank you. All right, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you.
Opposed? Motion carries. What else do we have? I moved my papers around. I can't find my agenda. Here we are. Oh, boy. Well, how long do you want to talk about the comprehensive plan initiatives? John, I hope you're tired.
Yeah, just give me 30 seconds.
All
So,
right, go ahead.
following up on discussion from a couple of months ago, I went back and I looked at, again, the zoning ordinance from several other surrounding townships, focusing on the issues of lot sizes and environmental protection criteria. And I sent out an email to everybody. I think it was a large file, so I hope everybody got it.
Mine came through.
But so what I found is that many of the surrounding townships do have an environmental criteria, environmental protection criteria as part of their ordinances, including ours. So, in our RC district, there's a line in there that says that for woodland areas, 60% of woodland areas would be preserved as part of a new development. However, when I ran the calculations for Green Top, and if you look at Green Top, there's no wetlands. It's totally wooded, 100% wooded. So Green Top was 18.25 acres. This is taking more than 30 seconds. 60% of 18.25 acres was like 10.95 acres, something like that, which left about 7 acres for development. If you divide 7 acres by 1.8, you get 4 and a fraction, which rounds up to 5. But Green Top was approved for 7. So I'm doing something wrong. I don't know what I was doing wrong. That I got 5 when we approved it for 7. But the concept being that there is language in there that takes into consideration woodlands, wetlands, steep slopes, soil types as a way of protecting some of the ground from it being overdeveloped. And that was kind of where Mary was steering us a couple months back. And rather than trying to look to change lot sizes, that if we look for other criteria to try to protect the land, that there may be options there for us. So that's what I was pursuing with my last email.
And not to prolong the discussion, but I think, John, where that gets to is the site capacity calculation section in the zoning ordinance. I forget if it's section 1700 or 1900 or might be 2100, but they're different or non-existent for the B1 single family development. When you're doing a standard development, there's very limited required open space or protected area. You still have to protect features, but you don't necessarily have to protect it as a bulk area. And that may be where there could be a modification to the ordinance to change the site capacity calculations for a standard B1 development, which is a sort of a no open space, large lot development, to have more of a set aside for those environmental features instead of just allowing them to be on the lot preserved somewhere. So that's probably where your analysis would lead to. That's the change that could be made in the ordinance.
Thank you. That's probably the missing piece that I didn't have before. So I'll go back and look at those other ordinances again and see whether they also pertain to the B1 usage or not. And I'll report back to everybody.
I appreciate all your work on that, John.
Yeah,
Yeah, thanks, John.
thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Any more on that?
Not for me.
Okay. All right. Well, that's the only old business. We don't have any, let's see, when you're,
No, we're all
pending approvals. We're all good.
yeah. Time wise, we're all good.
All right. All right. Well, I'm going to move on to public comment. Do we have any more emails, Greg?
No, those were all the emails.
Okay. If somebody wants to comment, you can raise your hand now. All right. Seeing none, I would look for a motion to adjourn.
John, I'll make the motion.
Andy, second.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right. Opposed? Motion carries. All right. Thanks. It's been a good long night.
Have a good
Night,
night.
Thank you. We'll see you.
Have a good night.
Good night.
Good night.
See ya.
Take care.